The certified letter arrived on our anniversary. 5 years of marriage, and my mother-in-law Eleanor was sending legal documents instead of congratulations. I stood in our Cambridge condo's kitchen, staring at the formal letterhead of Wilson and Associates, my father-in-law Richard's prestigious law firm. The postnuptial agreement was neatly paperclipped to a handwritten note. For the protection of the Wilson family assets, please sign by Friday. Eleanor. Before we jump in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My hands trembled as I read through the terms. In the event of divorce, I would forfeit any claim to Daniel's inheritance, family properties, and, most insultingly, would receive only a reasonable stipend determined by Eleanor herself. 5 years of building a life with Daniel reduced to a reasonable stipend. What's that? Daniel appeared behind me, champagne glasses in hand. We'd been planning to celebrate tonight. Your mother's anniversary gift, I said, sliding the document toward him. A post-nup. Daniel's face fell as he skimmed the pages. Rachel, I didn't know anything about this. I'll call her right now. Before he could reach for his phone, it buzzed with Eleanor's perfect timing. Daniel answered on speaker. Darling, did you receive my package? Eleanor's crisp voice filled our kitchen. Just a bit of housekeeping. The family attorneys feel it's prudent given Rachel's background. My background? I whispered. Mother, we're not discussing this today. It's our anniversary. Oh, is that today? Well, all the more reason to ensure everything's in order. 5 years is quite a milestone, especially for marriages without prenuptial agreements. A pause. The family board meeting is this weekend at the Cape House. Bring the signed papers then. We have important matters to discuss. Eleanor, I started. Rachel, dear, this isn't personal. It's financial prudence. Something I understand might be foreign to you, given your upbringing. But the Wilson assets need protection. After she hung up, Daniel pulled me close. I'll handle this. She can't force us to sign anything. But I'd seen that look before, the one he got whenever Eleanor made demands. His words were strong, but his resolve always crumbled under his mother's influence. I'd spent 5 years watching it happen over smaller issues than this. My phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. Happy anniversary, lunch tomorrow to celebrate? Olivia Chen, my former boss, mentor, and the woman who'd changed my life 10 years ago when I was just a college graduate with big ideas and no capital. She'd seen something in me then. I wondered what she'd see now, a woman being systematically pushed out of her marriage by her mother-in-law. I need some air, I told Daniel, grabbing my coat. Outside, Boston's spring evening embraced me as I walked toward the river. I thought back to my wedding day, Eleanor cornering me before the ceremony. You've done well for yourself landing a Wilson, she'd said, adjusting my veil with cold precision. Just remember, family comes first for us. Always. I'd smiled. Politely, thinking she meant I was now family too. 5 years later, this post-nup made it clear. I had never been family. I was an outsider who needed to be controlled. As I watched the sunset over the Charles River, I made a decision. Eleanor Wilson thought she knew everything about me, the middle-class marketing professional who'd married up. What she didn't know could fill a bank vault, and it did. Olivia's favorite cafe hadn't changed in the decade I'd known her, still, serving the strongest espresso in Boston, and still tucked away where the financial elite wouldn't bother looking. She was already at our usual corner table, elegant as always in her tailored suit, silver streaking through her black hair. There she is! Olivia stood to embrace me. The anniversary girl, though you don't look like someone celebrating. I sank into the chair across from her. Eleanor sent a post-nuptial agreement. Wants it signed before this weekend's family meeting. Olivia's expression darkened. After 5 years? What triggered this? She mentioned a family board meeting, something about important matters to discuss. And Daniel? I sighed, stirring my coffee without drinking it. Says he'll handle it. You know how that usually goes. Like her last 4 demands? Olivia raised an eyebrow. The holiday home location? Your job offer in New York? The charity board position? He means well, I said automatically. The defense worn smooth from repetition. And yet, Eleanor always wins. Olivia leaned forward. Rachel, remember what I told you when you first mentioned dating Daniel Wilson? I nodded. Keep your assets separate. Never mention your investments to his family. And have you? Not a word. I'd followed her advice meticulously, maintaining my separate accounts, keeping my financial independence invisible. Eleanor still sees me as the charity case who snagged her son, the marketing girl with nothing to her name but student loans. Good. Olivia nodded approvingly. And the Horizon Tech investment? A smile finally broke through my worry. Stock split 3 ways since their new product launch. The early shares you helped me buy are significant now. Significant, Olivia chuckled. Such a modest term for becoming a millionaire before 30. The waitress refilled our cups, and I waited until she moved away before responding. Eleanor has no idea. She thinks my income comes entirely from my marketing consultancy. Which you could afford to close tomorrow if you wanted, Olivia pointed out. That's not the point, I said, frustration rising. I love my work. I've built something meaningful. What bothers me is being treated like I'm after Daniel's money when I've never cared about it. So what are you going to do about this post-nup? I took a deep breath. I don't know yet. Daniel and I are expected at the Cape House this weekend. The whole family will be there. Including Richard? Olivia asked, her tone shifting slightly. Yes. Why? Olivia's fingers tapped thoughtfully on her cup. Richard Wilson might be just as old money as his wife, but he's always struck me as more equitable. Have you ever spoken to him directly about Eleanor's interference? No, I admitted. He's usually buried in work, and when he's not, Eleanor dominates the conversation. Perhaps it's time you had a private word with your father-in-law, Olivia suggested. But first, she pulled out her tablet. Let's look at exactly what Eleanor's asking you to sign away. For the next hour, we dissected the post-nuptial agreement, finding increasingly problematic clauses buried in the legal jargon. This isn't just about inheritance, Olivia said, underlining a passage with her finger. This clause could be interpreted to include any business Daniel becomes involved with, including your joint ventures. My stomach tightened. Daniel and I had been discussing starting a design consultancy together, combining his architectural expertise with my marketing background. And this one, she continued, gives Eleanor approval rights over any significant purchase you make together. Homes, vehicles, even investments over a certain amount. She's not just protecting family assets, I realized. She's establishing control over our future. Exactly. Olivia set down her tablet. Rachel, you need to decide what matters more. Keeping peace with Eleanor or protecting the life you want with Daniel. As I left the cafe, my phone buzzed with a text from my brother Mark. Got time for a call. Need your financial brain. Mark had been my rock since our parents died in my senior year of college. He'd put his own education on hold to make sure I could finish mine, working double shifts while I completed my degree. It was one of the reasons I'd been so determined to succeed, to make his sacrifice worthwhile. I called him immediately. What's wrong? He asked instead of hello. You sound stressed. I explained the situation while walking back toward our condo. Mark listened quietly until I finished. Have you told Daniel about your assets yet? He finally asked. No, I admitted. It never seemed like the right time. And then it just became this secret I was keeping. Rachel, Mark's voice was gentle but firm. You've been married for 5 years. Don't you think he deserves to know his wife is wealthier than his mother thinks? It's complicated, I said, watching a family of ducks navigate the river. Daniel's grown up with money being a power play in his family. Eleanor uses it to control everyone. I didn't want our relationship tainted by that. But now? Now I don't know if I'm protecting our relationship or just being a coward. I stopped walking, suddenly overwhelmed. What if I tell him and he feels betrayed? Or worse, what if he tells Eleanor? Then you'll know where you stand, Mark said simply. Better now than after you've signed away your rights in this post-nup. You're right, I sighed. I need to be honest with him before we go to the Cape. And Rachel, Mark added, for what it's worth, if Daniel can't handle discovering his wife is financially independent, that says more about him than about you. After hanging up, I checked my portfolio app, a habit whenever I felt anxious. The numbers still startled me sometimes. 10 years of smart investments had grown my initial stake with Olivia's guidance into something that would make even Eleanor Wilson take notice. But money had never been my goal. Freedom was. The ability to make choices without fear, to build something meaningful on my own terms. Eleanor's post-nup threatened that freedom not because of the money, but because of the power it represented. Her power over my marriage. I was still staring at my phone when it rang again. Daniel. Hey, he sounded tired. Just checking when you'll be home. I picked up dinner from that Italian place you like. I'm on my way, I said, making a decision. And Daniel? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. We need to talk before we go to the Cape. There's something I should have told you a long time ago. The line went quiet for a moment. That sounds serious. It is, I said, but not in the way you might think. When I arrived home, Daniel had set up dinner on our balcony, candles, wine, the works. A peace offering, or perhaps a silent apology for his mother's intrusion on our anniversary. Before we eat, I said, sitting down across from him, I need to show you something. I opened my portfolio app and handed him my phone. He glanced at it, confusion crossing his face, then looked again more carefully. His eyes widened. Rachel, are these your accounts? I nodded. I've been investing since college. Olivia mentored me, helped me get started with some early-stage tech companies. One of them was Horizon Tech. Daniel looked up sharply. The Horizon Tech? The one that went public last year? Yes, I was an early investor. I took a deep breath. Daniel, I'm not the financial liability your mother thinks I am. I've kept this separate because money changes things between people. I've seen how it works in your family. He set the phone down carefully, his expression unreadable. So, all this time, while my mother has been treating you like you're after the Wilson fortune? I've had my own, I finished. Not as much as your family, but enough that I've never needed their money. I've never wanted it. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. Why didn't you tell me? At first, it wasn't significant, just some promising investments. Then, as they grew, I worried about how it would look. Would you think I'd deceived you? Would your family assume I'd been hiding assets? Like you were, he pointed out, a hint of edge in his voice. Not hiding, I corrected. Protecting. You've seen how Eleanor uses money to control everyone around her. I didn't want that dynamic between us. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the Boston skyline. So what now? You show this to my mother and prove her wrong? No, I said firmly. This isn't about proving anything to Eleanor. It's about being honest with you before we discuss this post-nup. I won't sign something based on false assumptions about who I am and what I bring to this marriage. He turned back to me, studying my face. You know she'll see this as a betrayal. Not the money, the fact that you kept secrets. And how do you see it? I asked quietly. Daniel reached across the table and took my hand. I see a woman who's smarter than anyone gave her credit for, including me. He squeezed my fingers. I'm not angry, Rachel. I'm processing. But I understand why you kept this separate. Relief washed through me. So what do we do about the post-nup? His expression hardened. We're going to the Cape this weekend, but not to sign anything. It's time Mother understood she can't control our marriage. For the first time since the certified letter arrived, I felt hope. But as Daniel refilled our wine glasses and steered the conversation to happier topics, a nagging doubt remained. His promises to stand up to Eleanor had faltered before. Would knowing about my financial status finally give him the courage to break the pattern? Later that night, as Daniel slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, rehearsing conversations in my head. What would I say to Eleanor if she pressed the issue? To Richard? To Daniel's sister Sophia, who had always been kind but never openly defied her mother? My phone glowed softly with a text from Olivia. Whatever happens, remember who you are. Your worth isn't in your bank accounts or your marriage certificate. I clutched the phone like a talisman. Olivia had believed in me when I was just a bright-eyed intern with big ideas. Her guidance had helped me build my hidden fortune, but more importantly, she'd taught me to value myself. As dawn broke over Boston, I made a promise to myself. This weekend would be different. One way or another, Eleanor Wilson was about to discover that the daughter-in-law she'd underestimated had resources she never imagined, and not all of them were financial. The drive to Cape Cod that Friday afternoon was unusually quiet. Daniel focused intently on the road while I watched Massachusetts roll by, each mile bringing us closer to confrontation. Sophia called, Daniel finally said as we crossed the Sagamore Bridge. She wanted to warn us that Mother's invited James Parker to dinner tonight. My stomach tightened. James Parker was the Wilsons' longtime attorney, the family fixer, as Daniel once described him. So she's making her move immediately, I said. No time to settle in first. Daniel's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. Apparently there's more. The board meeting tomorrow isn't just about our post-nup. Mother's planning to announce significant changes to the family trust. What kind of changes? Sophia doesn't know details, just that it involves all of us. She seemed worried. The Wilson vacation home appeared ahead, a sprawling cape, Cod Colonial with private beach access and a view that belonged in architectural magazines. Usually I admired its classic beauty, but today it looked like a battlefield. Eleanor was waiting on the porch, immaculate as always in linen pants and a cashmere sweater despite the warm spring day. Her silver blonde hair was perfectly coiffed, her smile precisely calibrated, warm enough for appearances, cold enough to remind me of my place. You've arrived just in time, she announced as Daniel kissed her cheek. James will be here for dinner at 7. I trust you've had time to review the documents I sent? Mother, Daniel began, but I squeezed his arm. We've reviewed them thoroughly, Eleanor, I said evenly. We'll discuss everything after dinner. Her smile tightened fractionally. Of course, dear. Your room is ready upstairs, the usual one. As we carried our bags upstairs, Sophia intercepted us in the hallway. At 32, she was the youngest, Wilson child, and the only one who had defied family expectations by pursuing academia instead of law or finance. Thank God you're here, she whispered, hugging us both. Mother's been impossible all week. Dad's been locked in the study with accountants. What's really going on, Soph? Daniel asked. She glanced over her shoulder. I'm not entirely sure, but I overheard something about liquidating assets. And your name came up, along with words like safeguard and contingency. My eyes met Daniel's. This wasn't just about a post-nup anymore. Where's Richard? I asked. Still in the study, Sophia replied. but he asked to see you both before dinner. Daniel looked surprised. Dad specifically asked for us? Sophia nodded. For Rachel, actually. He said he needed her marketing perspective on something, but I think that was just an excuse. I felt a flutter of hope. Perhaps Olivia had been right about Richard being more reasonable than his wife. I'll unpack and go see him, I decided. Daniel touched my arm. Want me to come with you? I considered this, then shook my head. I think I need to speak with your father alone first. 20 minutes later, I knocked on the study door, my heart pounding against my ribs. Despite 5 years of marriage, I'd rarely had private conversations with Richard Wilson. Eleanor had always ensured she was present, mediating and interpreting as if neither of us spoke the same language. Come in, Richard's deep voice called. The study was classic old money, leather-bound books, antique maps, a desk that had probably witnessed the signing of documents since the Revolutionary War. Richard stood by the window, looking older than Saw, his 65 years, fatigue evident in the slump of his shoulders. Rachel, he turned, gesturing to a chair. Thank you for coming. Please, sit. I remained standing. Eleanor sent us a post-nuptial agreement. Is that what this is about? Richard sighed, suddenly looking tired. Not entirely, no. Please sit down. What I need to discuss requires some explanation. I sank into the leather chair, studying my father-in-law's face. Despite being married to Eleanor for 40 years, Richard had always seemed more reasonable, more measured. Now, he looked troubled. I assume you've seen the agreement Eleanor prepared? He began. Yes. It's quite thorough in removing my rights to anything with the Wilson name attached. Richard winced slightly. My wife can be protective of family interests. Is that what we're calling it? I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. To my surprise, a hint of a smile touched Richard's lips. You've never been afraid to speak your mind. I've always respected that about you. He moved to his desk, opening a drawer. Eleanor doesn't know I'm having this conversation with you. She wouldn't approve. He withdrew a folder, different from the one containing the post-nup, and placed it before me. What's this? I asked. Financial reports for Wilson Investments from the last 3 years. He tapped the folder. I'd like your opinion on them. Confused, I opened the folder and began scanning the documents. At first glance, they showed a healthy investment firm with substantial holdings. But as I looked closer, patterns emerged. Systematic liquidation of long-term assets, unusual transfers to offshore accounts, declining returns disguised by creative accounting. These numbers don't add up, I said slowly. Financial training kicking in. You're showing growth on paper, but the actual asset base is shrinking. And these transfers? I looked up at Richard. What's really going on? Richard sat heavily in his chair. Eleanor has been making investment decisions without full board approval, using family connections to bypass oversight. She's been losing money, I realized. Hemorrhaging it, Richard confirmed grimly. Bad investments, poor timing, refusal to listen to advisors. The Wilson fortune isn't what it appears to be anymore. I sat back, mind racing. And the post-nup? The family meeting? Eleanor believes we need to consolidate what remains, protect the core family, meaning herself, Daniel, and Sophia. She sees you as, he hesitated, an outsider, a liability. I finished for him. Yes. He met my eyes directly. But I disagree. I've watched how you manage your consulting business, your strategic thinking, your careful growth. You understand value in ways Eleanor never has. I studied Richard carefully. Why are you showing me this? Why not tell Daniel directly? Because Eleanor has convinced Daniel and Sophia that everything is fine, that our financial position is stronger than ever. They trust her completely. He leaned forward. But you've always watched Eleanor carefully, measured your words, looked beyond the surface. So what do you want from me? I asked cautiously. Help me convince Daniel of the truth before Eleanor can lock you out completely. If you sign that postnup, you'll have no legal standing to intervene in family financial decisions that will affect your future with my son. I closed the folder, mind working rapidly. Does James Parker know about this financial situation? Richard nodded. James has been trying to implement damage control for the past year. That's why he's here tonight, not just for your post-nup, but to discuss broader legal strategies. A knock at the door interrupted us. Eleanor's voice came through. Richard? James has arrived early. I need you both downstairs. Richard stood, taking the folder and returning it to his desk drawer. He locked it with a small key from his pocket. Think about what I've said, he murmured as we walked to the door. And Rachel, be careful tonight. Eleanor is more desperate than she appears. As we descended the stairs together, I caught sight of Daniel in the living room, already engaged in conversation with James Parker. Sophia stood nearby, tension visible in her posture. And at the center of it all was Eleanor, perfectly poised, glass of wine in hand, orchestrating her family like pieces on a chessboard. She looked up as we entered, her eyes narrowing slightly at the sight of Richard and me together. There you are, she said smoothly. James was just asking about you, Rachel. Something about marketing perspectives on legal documents. James Parker, silver-haired, immaculately suited, with the practiced smile of someone who made his fortune navigating other people's problems, extended his hand to me. Mrs. Wilson, he greeted me formally. I understand we have some paperwork to discuss this weekend. Before I could respond, Eleanor interjected. After dinner, James. Family first, business second. Isn't that the Wilson way? But as she ushered everyone toward the dining room, I caught the calculating look she exchanged with James. They had already discussed me, planned their approach, prepared their arguments. What they couldn't have prepared for was the knowledge I now possessed. Not just of my own financial strength, but of the Wilson family's weakness. As I took my seat at Eleanor's perfectly arranged dinner table, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The battle lines had been drawn, but for the first time, I wasn't fighting alone. And Eleanor Wilson had no idea what she was up against. Dinner. At the Wilson Cape Cod estate had always been a performance. Crystal that captured the candlelight, silver polished to mirror brightness, conversation carefully orchestrated to display wealth and influence without appearing crass. Tonight was no exception, except for the undercurrent of tension that electrified every interaction. Rachel, Eleanor said, passing the roasted potatoes with practiced elegance. James tells me your little marketing consultancy has been doing well. How satisfying it must be to have a hobby that pays for itself. 5 years ago, that barb would have stung. Now, knowing what I knew about both my finances and hers, I merely smiled. It's been quite rewarding, Eleanor. I've always believed in building something sustainable rather than chasing quick profits. Richard coughed into his napkin, and Sophia's eyes widened slightly at my subtle counterattack. Indeed, James Parker interjected smoothly. Smart financial? Management is increasingly rare these days. The number of seemingly stable fortunes I've seen crumble recently is quite alarming. Eleanor's knuckles whitened around her wine glass. Speaking of financial management, James has been instrumental in restructuring several elements of our family holdings, streamlining for maximum efficiency. Restructuring how exactly? Daniel asked, his gaze shifting between his mother and the attorney. Nothing for you to worry about, darling, Eleanor waved dismissively. Simply ensuring the Wilson legacy remains protected for generations to come. Which is precisely why we've prepared the agreement we'll be discussing later, James added, turning to me. Rachel, I understand you come from more modest financial circumstances. These kinds of legal protections might seem unusual to you, but they're quite standard among families of a certain position. I set down my fork, meeting his condescending gaze directly. Actually, James, I'm quite familiar with asset protection strategies. Before marketing, I studied finance. I find it fascinating how different families approach wealth preservation. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. I had deviated from the script, the compliant daughter-in-law grateful for crumbs from the Wilson table. Finance? Eleanor's laugh was brittle. Daniel never mentioned that particular interest of yours. There's quite a bit about Rachel you've never asked about, Mother, Daniel said quietly, his hand finding mine under the table. Eleanor's smile tightened, but before she could respond, Sophia deftly changed the subject to her university research, and the immediate tension subsided. Yet as the dinner progressed through its carefully choreographed courses, I felt Eleanor's calculating gaze returning to me repeatedly, reassessing, recalibrating. After dessert, Eleanor rose with practiced grace. Why don't we move to the study? For coffee? James has brought the final documents for review. As everyone stood, I felt a slight vibration from my phone. Checking it discreetly, I saw a message from Olivia. Sending something important to your email. Check before you sign anything. I'll join you in a moment, I said, gesturing with my phone. Work emergency. Eleanor frowned at this breach of etiquette, but Daniel nodded. We'll wait for you before discussing anything important. In the quiet of the dining room, I quickly opened my email to find Olivia had sent a document titled Wilson Investment Analysis. Attached was a note. Called in a favor from an old colleague at Financial Regulatory Commission. Public records only, but revealing. Eleanor has been digging herself into a hole for years. Richard knows. Use carefully. The attached analysis confirmed everything Richard had shown me earlier, but with additional context, dates of particularly disastrous investments coinciding with Eleanor's takeover of specific accounts, regulatory flags that had been smoothed over with political connections, a pattern of increasing desperation in the investment strategies. A second email arrived as I was reading. One more thing. The family home you're sitting in right now? Mortgaged to the hilt last year. Check the county records I've attached. My heart pounded as I clicked the attachment, a publicly filed mortgage document showing the Cape Cod property had been leveraged against a substantial loan from an offshore entity. The timing aligned perfectly with one of the failed investments, detailed in the first document. The Wilson fortune wasn't just damaged, it was potentially on the verge of collapse. And Eleanor was scrambling to consolidate whatever remained, using this post-nuptial agreement as one piece of a larger desperation play. Armed with this knowledge, I took a deep breath and headed toward the study, where my future with Daniel would either solidify or shatter completely. The heavy oak door was partially closed when I approached. Through the gap, I could see Eleanor standing by the fireplace, her voice low but intense. Need to act quickly before this gets any worse, she was saying to James. Once Rachel signs, we can move the remaining assets into the restructured trust where they'll be protected from any potential creditors. And Daniel has agreed to be a signatory on the new accounts? James asked. He will, Eleanor said with absolute certainty. He's always understood what's necessary to protect the family name. And if Rachel refuses to sign? This from Richard, seated in a leather armchair, looking older than he had earlier. She won't, Eleanor stated flatly. She has no idea what's really at stake, and she has everything to lose by refusing. Once the papers are signed, we can proceed with Phase 2, transferring Daniel's inheritance portion before any unfortunate news becomes public. I had heard enough. I pushed the door open fully, and 4 heads turned toward me. Eleanor's, James's, Richard's, and Sophia's. Daniel was conspicuously absent. Where's Daniel? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. He stepped out to take a call, Sophia said, her expression troubled. Something about a project emergency. Perfect timing, Rachel. Eleanor gestured to a chair positioned directly across from James and his open briefcase of documents. We were just discussing the final details of the agreement. I heard, I said simply, remaining standing. We're discussing how I'll definitely sign because I have no idea what's really at stake. Eleanor's smile froze, but she recovered quickly. Simply legal formalities, dear. Nothing for you to worry about. Actually, I countered, moving further into the room, I think there's quite a bit to worry about. Like the mortgage on this house, or the failed investments in Asian markets last year, or the regulatory flags on Wilson investment accounts. The color drained from Eleanor's face. Richard straightened in his chair, his expression a mixture of alarm and what might have been respect. James Parker's professional mask slipped for just a moment, revealing shock before the lawyer regained his composure. I'm not sure where you're getting your information, James said carefully, but discussing confidential family financial matters with outsiders could be problematic. I'm not an outsider, I stated firmly. I'm Daniel's wife. And everything I've mentioned is public record if you know where to look. Eleanor took a step toward me, her facade of gentility cracking. Whatever you think you know. I know the Wilson fortune is in trouble, I interrupted, my voice low but clear. I know you've been making increasingly risky investments trying to recover from earlier losses. I know this house, the sacred family summer home, is mortgaged to an offshore company that appears to be controlled by you personally, not the family trust. Eleanor's face contorted with rage and fear. How dare you? Mother, Sophia said sharply, rising from her seat. Is this true? Have you mortgaged the Cape House? The momentary silence was confirmation enough. Richard sighed heavily, suddenly, looking all of his 65 years. It's worse than just the house, he said quietly. Eleanor has been managing the family investments largely alone for the past 5 years, against my better judgment. Richard, Eleanor hissed. No, Eleanor, enough. Richard stood slowly. Rachel has figured it out anyway. We're not in a position of strength here. The door opened behind me, and Daniel entered, his face creased with confusion. What's going on? I could hear raised voices from the hallway. No one spoke for a moment. Then James cleared his throat. Perhaps we should reschedule this discussion for tomorrow when everyone is calmer. No, I said firmly. Daniel deserves to know what this post-nuptial agreement is really about. I turned to my husband. Your mother isn't protecting family assets from me. She's trying to shield whatever's left from creditors and regulatory investigations by putting them in your name, but with her maintaining control through this agreement. Daniel looked from me to his mother, confusion turning to concern. What is she talking about? Your wife is exaggerating a temporary cash flow situation, Eleanor said dismissively. James, the documents, please. But James hesitated, glancing at Richard. The silent communication between the men spoke volumes. The attorney was reassessing his position now that he realized I knew more than anyone had anticipated. Daniel, I said softly, your family's financial situation isn't what you've been led to believe. The Wilson investments have been failing for years, hidden behind creative accounting and your mother's reputation. That's absurd, Daniel said automatically, but I could see the first flicker of doubt in his eyes. Father? Richard met his son's gaze steadily. It's true. Not as dire as Rachel might think, perhaps, but serious enough that we need to take protective measures. Protective measures that include having me sign away rights to assets that might not even exist anymore? I challenged. The assets exist, Eleanor snapped. They simply need reorganization. Show me the books then, Daniel demanded, his voice hardening. All of them. Not just the summary reports you've been giving the family board. Eleanor's expression shifted to one I'd never seen before. Fear. Daniel, this isn't the time. It's exactly the time, he insisted. If you're asking my wife to sign legal documents that affect our future, we deserve complete transparency. James Parker began discreetly gathering his papers. Perhaps we should adjourn for the evening and— No one is adjourning anything, Sophia interjected, surprising everyone. Quiet, academic Sophia, who usually avoided family confrontations, now stood tall, eyes blazing. Mother, I've been asking questions about the trust distributions for months, and you've been evading them. I want answers too. Eleanor looked around the room, finding no allies. Even James was avoiding her gaze now, his loyalty clearly extending, only as far as his professional reputation would allow. Fine, she said icily. Richard, show them the complete financials. Show them what's happened to the markets. Show them how I've been fighting to save this family while you buried yourself in your books and your art. Richard moved to his desk and unlocked a drawer, the same one where he'd stored the folder he'd shown me earlier. But instead of that single folder, he withdrew a laptop. Everything is here, he said, his voice heavy with resignation. The complete financial picture of Wilson Investments and the family holdings for the past 10 years. As Richard set up the laptop on his desk, Eleanor moved to the bar cart and poured herself a generous measure of scotch, her hand trembling slightly. Sophia positioned herself behind Richard, while Daniel came to stand beside me, his presence solid and reassuring. Before we go through this, Richard said, looking directly at Daniel and Sophia, you need to understand that while the situation is serious, it isn't hopeless. With the right restructuring and more conservative investment approaches, much of what's been lost could potentially be recovered over time. How bad is it, Dad? Daniel asked quietly. Richard turned the laptop screen toward us, displaying a comprehensive financial dashboard. The graphs told a clear story: steady growth until about 7 years ago, followed by plateau, then a steep decline beginning roughly 5 years ago. The Wilson family net worth has decreased by approximately 68% since your mother took over primary management of the investments, Richard stated flatly. Daniel inhaled sharply. Sophia gripped the back of Richard's chair for support. That's impossible, Daniel said. The annual reports were crafted to show what your mother wanted you to see, Richard finished. The actual SEC filings tell a different story, hidden behind subsidiary companies and complex accounting. Eleanor slammed her glass down. The recession hit everyone hard. I made the best decisions with the information available at the time. The recession ended years ago, Mother, Sophia pointed out. Other family offices recovered. Why didn't we? Because your mother began taking increasingly desperate risks to recoup initial losses, Richard explained, clicking through to another screen showing a series of large investments in speculative ventures. When these failed, she doubled down instead of cutting losses. Daniel turned to Eleanor, his expression hardening. And the post-nuptial agreement? How does that fit into this? James Parker cleared his throat. Mrs. Wilson consulted me about asset protection strategies. The post-nuptial agreement would ensure that any assets transferred to your name would remain under family control regardless of future circumstances. Future circumstances meaning potential bankruptcy or divorce, I translated. It's standard practice, James defended weakly. No, Daniel's voice was cold now. Standard practice would have been a prenuptial agreement 5 years ago, not a post-nuptial designed to shield failing assets from creditors. Eleanor pushed away from the bar cart, her composure cracking. I have done everything to protect this family's legacy. Yes, I took risks. Yes, some of them failed, but I refuse to be the Wilson who loses everything our ancestors built. So instead you mortgaged our family home, Sophia said quietly. You lied to us for years. I protected you from ugly realities, Eleanor shouted, mask finally falling. Completely. Do you think it's easy maintaining our position in Boston society with dwindling resources? The memberships, the charity boards, the obligations, all of it costs money we no longer have. The room fell silent. In all my years of knowing Eleanor Wilson, I had never seen her lose control like this. She had always been perfectly poised, perfectly controlled, perfectly intimidating. Now, with her financial house of cards exposed, she seemed smaller somehow, desperate in a way that made me feel an unexpected twinge of pity. Daniel moved away from me, approaching his mother slowly. Why didn't you just tell us the truth? We could have faced this together, as a family. And watch the disappointment in your eyes? Watch our family name become gossip at every club? In Boston? Eleanor's voice cracked. I could fix it. I just needed more time. And my signature on a post-nuptial agreement, I added softly. Eleanor's gaze shifted to me, calculation replacing vulnerability. Your signature would allow us to transfer assets to Daniel in a way that protects them from broader family liabilities. It's not personal, Rachel. It's survival. It's fraud, Richard corrected tiredly. At least it would be if implemented as originally conceived. James winced visibly at this, beginning to edge toward the door. I think my presence here may no longer be beneficial to anyone. Perhaps it would be best if I stay exactly where you are, Daniel commanded, his voice carrying an authority I'd rarely heard him use. If you've been advising my mother on potentially fraudulent financial maneuvers, we need to understand exactly what's been proposed. The attorney stopped, conflicting loyalties playing across his face. James, Richard said quietly, whatever. Eleanor has asked of you. Remember that your duty is to the entire Wilson family, not just one member. After a moment's hesitation, James returned to his seat, setting his briefcase on the floor. I have only offered legal options within regulatory boundaries, he stated carefully. However, I will admit that some strategies discussed pushed those boundaries to their limits. Such as? Sophia prompted. Such as creating a series of trust transfers that would effectively shield certain assets from creditors while maintaining family control, James explained reluctantly. The post-nuptial agreement was one component of that strategy. I listened, pieces falling into place. You were going to transfer assets to Daniel, have me sign away any claim to them, then have Daniel sign control back to Eleanor through a separate agreement. James's silence was confirmation enough. That's why you pushed for this weekend, isn't it? I continued, looking at Eleanor. Before quarterly financials become public, before anyone outside the inner circle could see how bad things really are. The timing was advantageous, James admitted. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized from whenever he was deeply stressed. I can't believe this. All these years, the family meetings, the investment discussions, it was all a facade? Not at first, Richard said. The decline was gradual, then accelerated. Eleanor believed she could turn things around before anyone needed to know. And now? Sophia asked. What's the actual state of affairs? Richard turned back to the laptop, pulling up a summary page. The family still has assets. This house, though heavily mortgaged. The townhouse in Boston, which is in better shape financially. Some investment accounts that Eleanor couldn't access directly. Perhaps 30% of what we had 5 years ago. 30%? Sophia paled. My trust fund? Significantly diminished, Richard admitted, though not entirely gone. The room fell silent as the Wilson children absorbed the reality of their new financial situation. I watched Eleanor, expecting further defensiveness or anger. Instead, she seemed to deflate, sinking into a chair by the fireplace. I did what I thought was best, she said quietly. Every decision, every risk, it was all to preserve what generations of Wilsons built. By lying to your family, Daniel's voice was tight with controlled anger. By trying to manipulate Rachel into signing documents under false pretenses. By doing whatever was necessary, Eleanor countered, some of her old steel returning. Which is what Wilsons have always done. Daniel turned away from her, pacing the length of the study. So what happens now? Are we facing bankruptcy? Public? Scandal? James shifted uncomfortably. Not necessarily. With proper restructuring. What James means, Richard interrupted, is that we need to make significant changes, sell properties, cut expenses, adopt a much more conservative investment approach. It would mean a different lifestyle, but not destitution. And the creditors? I asked. The mortgage on this house? Can be managed, Richard said. Refinanced, renegotiated. It would be difficult, but not impossible. Throughout this exchange, I had been thinking rapidly, calculations and possibilities running through my mind. My own financial resources, substantial but not infinite, weighed against what the Wilsons were facing. The ethical implications of what Eleanor had attempted balanced against my commitment to Daniel and our future together. I need some air, Daniel announced suddenly, heading for the door. It's too much to process right now. Daniel, Eleanor started, rising from her chair. Not now, Mother, he cut her off sharply. I need to think. As the door closed behind him, an awkward silence fell over the room. James began gathering his papers more purposefully now, clearly eager to extract himself from the deteriorating family situation. I believe we can all agree that discussing the post-nuptial agreement further tonight would be unproductive, he said diplomatically. The post-nup is off the table, Richard stated firmly. Permanently. Eleanor opened her mouth as if to object, then closed it again, seeming to recognize she had lost this particular battle. I should check on Daniel, I said, moving toward the door. Rachel, Eleanor called, stopping me. When I turned, I saw her struggle visibly with whatever she wanted to say. Finally, she simply asked, How did you know? About the mortgage? The investments? I hesitated, considering how much to reveal. Let's just say I understand financial reports better than you gave me credit for. Olivia Chen, Eleanor said unexpectedly. Your former boss. She's still well connected in financial circles. I kept my expression neutral, neither confirming nor denying. I always wondered why someone with her reputation would take such an interest in a marketing graduate, Eleanor continued, studying me with new eyes. Perhaps there was more to you than I recognized. There usually is, Sophia interjected. With people you underestimate, Mother. I left them there. Eleanor facing the consequences of her financial manipulations, Richard beginning the long process of damage control, Sophia reassessing her own future in light of these revelations, and James Parker extricating himself from a potential professional disaster. Outside, the night air was cool and crisp, carrying the tang of salt from the ocean just beyond the property's manicured lawns. I found Daniel standing at the edge of the terrace, staring out toward the water, barely visible as a darker shadow, against the night sky. Hey, I said softly, moving to stand beside him. Hey. His voice was hollow. So my family's fortune is largely gone. My mother's been lying for years, and she tried to use our marriage as part of a scheme to hide assets. He laughed bitterly. Not exactly the anniversary weekend I had planned. I reached for his hand, relieved when he didn't pull away. I'm sorry it came out like this. Why? You didn't create this situation. He turned to look at me, his expression troubled in the dim light from the house windows. You just exposed it. Still, learning? Your family's financial reality isn't... I don't care about the money, Daniel interrupted, surprising me. I mean, yes, it's a shock, and yes, there are practical implications. But what I can't get past is the lies. Years of them. family board meetings where mother presented fictional reports, investment discussions where she pretended to value my input while already having made disastrous decisions. I listened, giving him space to process his feelings. "And you," he continued, turning to face me fully. "She's never respected you, never given you credit for your intelligence or capabilities. She was perfectly willing to manipulate you into signing that agreement under completely false pretenses." "To be fair," I said carefully, "she was desperate. People make poor choices when they're frightened." Daniel's eyebrows rose. "You're defending her? After everything she's done?" "Not defending," I clarified. "Just trying to understand. Your mother built her entire identity around being Eleanor Wilson, guardian of the family fortune and social standing. Watching that slip away must have been terrifying for her." Daniel was quiet for a long moment, considering this. "When did you get so wise about family dynamics?" "Around the time I married into yours," I replied with a small smile. "It was either develop wisdom or lose my mind." That drew a reluctant laugh from him. Fair point. His expression grew serious again. "So, what happens now?" I took a deep breath, making a decision. "Now we have an honest conversation about our future and about my finances. Your consultancy is doing well, but it's not just the consultancy," I interrupted gently. "Daniel, remember when I showed you my investment portfolio yesterday? That wasn't the complete picture." His brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "I mean that when Olivia mentored me, she didn't just teach me marketing. She recognized something in me, an instinct for market trends, for spotting opportunities others missed." I squeezed his hand. "The Horizon Tech investment wasn't a lucky break. It was one of several strategic early-stage investments I made, guided by Olivia initially, then increasingly on my own." Daniel was watching me closely now. How successful were these investments? This was the moment I'd been avoiding for years. The full disclosure of my financial situation to the man whose family had always defined themselves by their wealth and status. "Successful enough that we don't need to worry about our future, regardless of what happens with the Wilson finances," I said carefully. "I'm not as wealthy as your family was at its peak, but I'm comfortable. More than comfortable." "Define more than comfortable," Daniel pressed. I named a figure. The current value of my investment portfolio combined with my business assets. Daniel's eyes widened. "That's... Rachel, that's significant wealth." "I know," I said simply. "And I've kept it separate and quiet because I never wanted it to change things between us. I never wanted to be valued for my money, the way your family has always been." Daniel was silent for a long moment, processing this revelation on top of everything else he'd learned tonight. Finally, he shook his head with a disbelieving laugh. "So my mother has spent 5 years treating you like a gold digger after the Wilson fortune, while all along you've been quietly building your own?" "Ironic, isn't it?" I agreed. "It's more than ironic." Daniel ran a hand through his hair again. "It changes everything about how we move forward." My heart stuttered. Changes how? He must have heard the anxiety in my voice because he quickly pulled me closer. "Not between us. Never between us. I mean with my family, with this financial mess. I was standing out here trying to figure out how to protect you from the fallout of my mother's mistakes. Now I realize you might be the one best positioned to navigate all of this." Relief washed through me. "I don't know about that, but I do know we have options that your mother doesn't realize exist." Daniel's expression grew serious again. "I won't ask you to use your money to bail out my family, Rachel. That's not fair to you." "I'm not suggesting a bailout," I clarified. "But I might be able to help structure a more sensible recovery plan than whatever desperate measures your mother and James were cooking up." Daniel was quiet for a moment, then asked the question I knew was coming. "Why didn't you tell me? About the extent of your financial success? I looked out toward the ocean, gathering my thoughts. At first, it wasn't that significant. Then, as it grew, I saw how money functioned in your family, as power, as control, as a way to measure worth. I didn't want that dynamic between us. You thought I'd be like my mother? There was hurt in his voice. No, I turned back to him. I thought you might feel, I don't know, that the balance between us had shifted. That somehow it might diminish you if I brought more financial resources to our marriage than expected. That's not who I am, Daniel said firmly. I know that now, I acknowledged. But 5 years ago, when we were first married and still finding our footing, when your mother was constantly reminding you of your responsibilities to the Wilson name, it felt safer to keep things separate. Daniel nodded slowly, understanding dawning. And then it became a secret that was harder to share the longer you kept it. Exactly, I admitted. Until Eleanor forced my hand with this post-nup. Daniel glanced back toward the house, where lights still burned in the study. She's going to be furious when she realizes you've been financially independent all along. It undermines everything she believed about you. I'm not particularly concerned about Eleanor's feelings right now, I said dryly. No, I suppose not. Daniel rubbed his temples. God, what a mess. The Wilson fortune largely gone, family trust decimated, mother's reputation about to take a massive hit when this becomes public. It doesn't have to become public, I said thoughtfully. Not the extent of it anyway. Daniel looked at me, questioningly. Financial restructuring happens all the time, I explained. Companies do it, families do it. It only becomes scandalous if handled poorly. And you think there's a way to handle it well? Daniel sounded skeptical but hopeful. I think, I said carefully, that tomorrow we should have a very different kind of family meeting. One where all the cards are on the table, Eleanor's financial reality and my resources. Then we can discuss potential paths forward that preserve what matters most. And what's that? Daniel asked. Your family's dignity, if not their fortune, I replied. And our future together, built on honesty rather than manipulation. Daniel pulled me close, resting his forehead against mine. When did my marketing consultant wife become a financial strategist? Around the same time your mother started underestimating me, I said with a small smile. 5 years ago. As we stood there under the stars, the waves crashing distantly, against the shore, I felt a strange sense of peace descend. The confrontation I'd dreaded for years had finally happened, and while the outcome was messy and unresolved, the weight of secrecy had lifted from my shoulders. Tomorrow would bring difficult conversations, hard truths for Eleanor to face, and complex decisions about how much, if anything, I was willing to invest in salvaging the Wilson family's financial standing. But tonight, at least, Daniel and I had found solid ground together amid the ruins of his family's carefully constructed facade. Behind us, the lights in the study finally went dark, and I wondered what Eleanor was thinking now. Whether she was crafting new strategies, or finally, facing the reality of her situation. Either way, when morning came, she would discover that the daughter-in-law she had dismissed for so long was now a central player in the future of the Wilson family legacy. And that was a reckoning long overdue. Morning arrived with a gray mist, hanging over the cape, shrouding the Wilson estate in an appropriate metaphor for the family's clouded future. I woke early, finding Daniel already gone from our bed, a note on his pillow. Walking on the beach, needed to clear my head. Back for breakfast. I understood his need for solitude. The revelations of the previous night had fundamentally altered his understanding of both his family and our marriage. He needed time to process, to recalibrate his worldview. As for me, I had preparations to make. I opened my laptop and began a series of emails, first to Olivia, thanking her for the crucial information and requesting her discretion moving forward. then to my financial advisor, asking for detailed summaries of my investment portfolio that I could present if necessary. Finally to Mark, giving him a brief update and asking him to be available by phone later in the day. I was finishing my coffee when my phone rang, Sophia's name lighting up the screen. "Rachel?" Her voice was hushed, tense. "Are you alone?" "Yes," I replied, instantly alert. "Daniel's out walking. What's wrong?" "Mother's been in the study since dawn with James Parker. They've been making calls, pulling files. I heard your name mentioned more than once." A chill ran through me. "She's looking for leverage." "I think so," Sophia confirmed. "After you and Daniel left last night, she was... I've never seen her like that. Not angry exactly. Cold. Calculating. She told Father that if the family was going to fall, she wouldn't fall alone." "What does that mean?" "I don't know exactly, but Rachel..." Sophia hesitated. "Do you have anything in your past that Eleanor could use against you? Financially? Professionally? Personally? Because I think that's what she's looking for." I considered this, mentally reviewing my history. My financial affairs were meticulous. Olivia had taught me the importance of impeccable records. My business dealings were above board. My personal life before Daniel had been unremarkable. "I don't think so," I said finally. "But Eleanor's resourceful when she's desperate." "That's what worries me," Sophia admitted. "Listen, I managed to overhear a few fragments. Mother mentioned someone named Chen. Is that significant?" "Olivia Chen," I confirmed. "My former boss and mentor. Mother seems very interested in your relationship with her. Said something about following the money trail." I felt a flicker of unease. There was nothing improper about Olivia's mentorship or her guidance with my investments. But Eleanor excelled at spinning innocent relationships into suspicious narratives. "Thanks for the warning," I said. "Any idea what time this family meeting is supposed to happen?" 11, Sophia replied. "In the main dining room, not the study." "Mother wants neutral territory, apparently." She paused. "Rachel, there's something else you should know. I found Father in the kitchen at dawn, looking defeated. He said Mother has been moving assets for months without his knowledge, using his electronic signature." "That's fraud," I said sharply. "Yes," Sophia agreed quietly. "And if it becomes public, it won't just be financial ruin for the Wilsons. It could mean criminal charges." The implications settled heavily between us. Eleanor wasn't just fighting to preserve wealth. She was potentially fighting to stay out of prison. "What are you going to do?" Sophia asked finally. It was a fair question. I could walk away from this entire mess, take Daniel with me if he was willing, start fresh with my own resources. The Wilson family's financial implosion wasn't my responsibility, but that wasn't who I was. And despite everything, these people were my family too. Flawed, complicated, maddening, but family nonetheless. "I'll see you at 11, I said simply. After hanging up, I dressed carefully, a tailored black pantsuit that projected confidence. Without ostentation, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back neatly, battle armor for what promised to be a defining confrontation. I was applying lipstick when Daniel returned, windblown and damp from sea spray, his expression more settled than it had been last night. "Hey," he said, coming to stand behind me, our eyes meeting in the mirror. "You look ready for war." "Just prepared," I corrected, capping the lipstick. "Your sister called. Apparently, your mother's been hunting for ammunition since dawn." Daniel's expression darkened. "Against you? Who else?" I turned to face him. Sophia overheard her making inquiries about Olivia and our relationship. "Looking for something suspicious to explain your financial success," Daniel concluded. "That sounds like Mother." "Are you surprised?" "Not anymore." He sat heavily on the edge of the bed. I spent 2 hours walking the beach, thinking about my childhood, my relationship with her. There were always conditions attached to everything. Her approval, her affection, even basic attention, always contingent on behaving in ways that elevated the Wilson name. I sat beside him, taking his hand. "And now? Now I'm done," he said simply. "Whatever happens at this meeting, whatever plan Mother unveils, I'm making my decisions based on what's right, not what preserves her control or the family image." Relief washed through me. Even if it means public embarrassment, financial adjustments, your mother potentially facing legal consequences? Daniel met my gaze steadily. Even then, the truth matters more than appearances. I squeezed his hand, pride and love swelling in my chest. "Speaking of truth, we should talk about my potential role in all this before the meeting." "You mean your financial resources?" "Yes." I chose my words carefully. "Daniel, I want to be clear. I have no obligation to use my money to solve your family's problems, legally, morally, or otherwise." "Absolutely not," he agreed immediately, "and I would never ask you to." "But," I continued, "I'm willing to consider certain forms of assistance, under the right conditions. Not a bailout, but perhaps strategic investments or loans with proper legal protections." Daniel studied my face. "Why would you even consider that after how my mother has treated you?" "Not for her," I clarified. "For you. For Sophia, who's been nothing but kind to me. For Richard, who tried to warn me about what was happening. And frankly, for practical reasons. We're married, Daniel. Your family's public disgrace would affect us too." He nodded slowly, understanding. "So what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking we hear what Eleanor has to say," I replied. "Then we present an alternative approach, one that includes transparency, accountability, and significant changes to how financial decisions are made going forward." Daniel smiled slightly. "You've been planning this since last night, haven't you?" "I prefer to call it scenario mapping," I said with a small smile of my own. "After 5 years of dealing with your mother, I've learned to come prepared." At precisely 11 o'clock, we descended to the dining room together. The large table had been cleared of its usual decorative elements, replaced by stacks of folders and legal documents. Eleanor sat at the head, immaculately dressed as always, though I noted the slight puffiness around her eyes, evidence of a sleepless night. Richard occupied the opposite end, looking grim but resolute. Sophia was already seated halfway down, while James Parker stood by the sideboard, arranging papers. "Ah, the happy couple arrives," Eleanor said, her voice brittle with forced pleasantness. "Please sit. We have much to discuss." Daniel and I took seats beside Sophia, forming a united front across from where Eleanor had positioned her legal arsenal. "Before we begin," Eleanor continued, "I want to acknowledge that last night's revelations were unfortunate. However, the current situation requires pragmatic solutions, not emotional reactions." "Agreed," I said calmly. "Pragmatism is exactly what's needed." Eleanor's eyes narrowed slightly at my ready agreement. "Good. Then perhaps you'll see the wisdom in the approach James and I have developed." She nodded to the attorney, who stepped forward, distributing folders to each of us. "What we're proposing," James began, "is a comprehensive restructuring of the Wilson family holdings. A new trust structure that consolidates remaining assets while minimizing exposure to potential liabilities." I opened the folder, scanning the executive summary. The plan was exactly what I'd expected. A complex shell game designed to shield remaining assets from creditors while maintaining Eleanor's control through proxy arrangements with Daniel as the nominal head. "And the post-nuptial agreement?" I asked, looking up. "Modified but still necessary," James replied smoothly. "Given the circumstances, we've adjusted the terms to be more Equitable. I flipped to that section, finding that equitable meant I would retain rights to assets I brought into the marriage. How generous, while still surrendering any claim to Wilson family holdings or future inheritance. And what about the existing creditors? Daniel asked, his tone deceptively casual. The mortgage on this house? The investment loans? Eleanor waved a dismissive hand. Those will be renegotiated once the restructuring is complete. Meaning, Richard interjected from his end of the table, they'll be left holding the bag while whatever assets remain are sheltered in the new trust structure. He looked directly at James. Did you explain to my wife that this borders on fraudulent conveyance? The attorney shifted uncomfortably. The timing and intent of asset transfers is critical in such matters. With proper documentation. With proper fiction, you mean? Richard corrected sharply. Eleanor's composure cracked slightly. What would you have us do, Richard? Watch everything disappear? Become social pariahs? Is that what you want for your children? I want honesty, Richard replied firmly. Something that's been in short supply for too long. The tension in the room was palpable. Sophia glanced at me nervously, while Daniel remained focused on the documents, methodically making notes in the margins. If I may, I said, breaking the strained silence. I have some questions about this proposal. Eleanor's attention snapped to me, her expression guarded. Of course, Rachel. What aspects are unclear? Not unclear, I corrected. Concerning. For instance, this new trust structure places Daniel as trustee, but includes provisions that effectively require Eleanor's approval for any significant actions. Standard practice for family transitions, James offered. And these quarterly distributions to a Cayman Islands account? I continued, pointing to a line item buried in the financial projections. Eleanor's face tightened. Overseas investments require local banking relationships. Interesting, I said mildly. Especially since I don't see those investments detailed anywhere in these materials. Daniel looked up sharply. Mother? A tense silence fell. Finally, Richard spoke. It's an escape hatch, isn't it, Eleanor? Money set aside for yourself if everything else collapses. Eleanor didn't deny it, which was confirmation enough. I closed my folder decisively. This plan won't work. You're hardly qualified to make that assessment, Eleanor snapped. Actually, I countered calmly, I am. Financial structuring and investment analysis happen to be areas where I have considerable expertise. Eleanor's laugh was dismissive. Your marketing background hardly. Not my marketing background, I interrupted. My investment portfolio, my financial education, the same qualifications that have helped me build my own net worth to levels that would surprise you. That silenced her momentarily. James Parker was watching me with new interest, recalculating as lawyers tend to do when new information emerges. What Rachel means, Daniel added, is that we have an alternative proposal. One that doesn't involve legally questionable asset transfers or hidden escape hatches. Eleanor's eyes darted between us, suspicion dawning. What kind of alternative? I reached into my briefcase, extracting the documents I'd prepared early, that morning. A legitimate restructuring, one that addresses the actual financial issues rather than just hiding them. As I distributed my proposal, I could feel the energy in the room shift. Richard straightened in his chair, suddenly alert. Sophia leaned forward eagerly. Even James Parker seemed intrigued. The core problem, I began, isn't just bad investments or market downturns. It's a fundamental lack of transparency and appropriate governance in managing the Wilson family assets. Eleanor bristled. How dare you? Mother! Daniel cut in. Firmly. Let her finish. I continued, outlining the approach I'd developed. First, a complete and honest assessment of all remaining assets and liabilities. Second, a restructuring that prioritizes debt management and asset preservation rather than asset concealment. Third, A new management structure that includes professional advisors and formal oversight. No more unilateral investment decisions. And who would pay for this professional management? Eleanor demanded. We're already facing liquidity challenges. That's where I come in, I said quietly. The room fell silent. What exactly are you proposing? Richard asked carefully. I took a deep breath. A capital infusion to address the most pressing obligations. Structured as a proper investment, not a gift, with appropriate terms and protections. Enough to stabilize the situation while the longer-term restructuring takes place. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. And where would you get such capital? You're successful. Marketing consultancy? No, I met her gaze steadily. From my investment portfolio, which currently stands at approximately $12 million. The silence that followed was absolute. Sophia's mouth actually dropped open. James Parker was suddenly looking at me with the particular attention lawyers reserve for wealthy potential clients. Richard seemed thoughtful rather than shocked. Eleanor recovered first. That's absurd. If you had that kind of money, I would have kept it separate from family dynamics exactly like this one, I finished for her, which is precisely what I've done for the past decade. 10 years? Richard asked, brow furrowed. You've been building this portfolio since before you met Daniel? I nodded. I made some early investments in tech startups that performed exceptionally well. Horizon Tech was one of them. Horizon? James Parker couldn't contain his professional interest. You were an early investor in Horizon Technologies? Through a venture fund initially, then directly, I confirmed, along with several other similar positions. Daniel placed his hand over mine on the table, a gesture of support that didn't go unnoticed by anyone present. And you're willing to put your personal capital at risk to help the family? Richard asked, his tone a mixture of surprise and what might have been respect. Under specific conditions, I clarified. Complete transparency going forward. Professional oversight of all major investment decisions. And Eleanor steps back from financial management entirely. Eleanor's face flushed with anger. This is outrageous. You waltz in here with claims of hidden wealth, demanding control of family affairs that have been managed by Wilsons for generations. Managed into near collapse, Daniel interjected coldly. And what proof do we have of these supposed millions? Eleanor demanded, looking around the table for support. A convenient claim just when the family faces challenges. I had anticipated this. Without a word, I opened my laptop, entered my credentials, and turned the screen toward Richard, displaying the dashboard of my investment portfolio with its current valuations, transaction history, and performance metrics. Richard studied it carefully, then looked up at me with new eyes. This is substantial and legitimate. You can verify everything, I assured him. My financial advisors are prepared to provide full documentation. So that's your play, Eleanor said, her voice dangerously quiet. Buy your way into controlling the Wilson fortune with your mysterious millions. Not control, I corrected. Stabilization. There's a difference. And what exactly do you get out of this arrangement? Eleanor pressed. Besides power over a family that never fully accepted you? The question hung in the air, its naked hostility exposing Eleanor's fundamental misunderstanding of my character. I get a stable future for my husband and the family I married into, I replied simply. I get to prevent public humiliation and potential legal consequences for people who, despite our differences, matter to me. And frankly, I get a solid investment opportunity. The Wilson name still carries value, and with proper management, much of what's been lost could be recovered. Daniel squeezed my hand, silently communicating his support. I'd like to review these projections in detail, Richard said, already immersed in the financial models I'd included. The debt restructuring approach here is impressive. Of course, I agreed, I'm happy to walk through everything. This is happening rather fast, James Parker observed, his allegiance visibly shifting toward whichever Wilson faction seemed most financially viable. Perhaps we should take some time to consider both proposals carefully. Time isn't a luxury we have, I pointed out. The quarterly financials become public next week. The mortgage payment on this property is due in 15 days. And according to these documents, I tapped Eleanor's proposal, there are investor redemptions pending that cannot be fulfilled without liquidating core holdings. Eleanor's expression confirmed the accuracy of my assessment. Sophia, who had been quietly observing until now, finally spoke. I think Rachel's proposal makes sense. It addresses the actual problems rather than just hiding them. You would side with her, Eleanor snapped. I'm siding with reason, Mother, Sophia replied firmly. And with transparency. Something you've denied this family for years. Eleanor looked around the table, finding herself increasingly isolated. Her gaze settled on Daniel, her last hope for alliance. And you? You'd allow your wife to buy her way into family decisions? To dictate terms to your mother? Daniel met, her gaze steadily. What I see is Rachel offering help we desperately need, under terms that are fair and appropriate given the circumstances you created. The brutal simplicity of his assessment seemed to finally penetrate Eleanor's defensiveness. She sat back in her chair, something in her posture changing. Not surrender exactly, but perhaps the first recognition that her position was untenable. And if I refuse? She asked quietly. If I reject this assistance? Richard answered before anyone else could. Then we face the consequences of your financial decisions without a safety net. Possible bankruptcy, certain social embarrassment, potential legal scrutiny of certain transactions. Eleanor flinched visibly at the last part. You wouldn't allow that. Not to your wife of 40 years. I wouldn't have a choice, Richard replied, his voice gentle but firm. The financial realities won't disappear because we find them inconvenient, Eleanor. They never do. A heavy silence fell over the table as Eleanor seemed to finally grasp the gravity of her situation. When she spoke again, her voice had lost its sharp edge, replaced by something more calculating. I would need certain assurances, she said carefully, about my position, my role in the family. Your social position can remain intact, I said, understanding what mattered most to her. This can be presented publicly as a strategic reorganization, not a crisis response. You can maintain your board seats, your club memberships, your chairmanship of the charitable foundation. Eleanor's eyes narrowed suspiciously. You've thought this through rather thoroughly. I've had 5 years to observe what matters to you, I replied evenly. Another silence, this one contemplative rather than tense. James Parker, ever the weather vane, began discreetly gathering Eleanor's proposal documents, sensing which way the wind was blowing. I'll need time to review these terms, Eleanor finally said, neither accepting nor rejecting outright. You have until tomorrow morning, I replied. The market opens at 9:30, and certain actions need to be taken immediately if we're proceeding. With this plan. Eleanor bristled at the deadline but didn't argue. Progress of a sort. Perhaps, Richard suggested, we should adjourn for now. Give everyone time to review both proposals thoroughly. Daniel stood, signaling his agreement. Rachel and I will be available to answer questions about our approach. In the meantime, I suggest everyone consider what's truly at stake here. Not just money, but the integrity of this family moving forward. As the meeting broke up, I noticed James Parker hovering near Eleanor, speaking in low tones, no doubt offering revised legal advice now that the financial dynamics had shifted. Sophia approached us, her expression a mixture of shock and admiration. $12 million? She whispered. All this time, while Mother treated you like some fortune hunter? I smiled slightly. Life has a sense of irony sometimes. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" she asked. "Would it have changed anything?" I countered gently. "Would Eleanor have treated me differently if she knew I had money? Or would she have found other reasons to keep me at arm's length?" Sophia considered this, then nodded ruefully. "You're right. It was never really about money. It was about control." "Always," Daniel agreed, his arm slipping around my waist. "Which is why this proposal is about more than financial restructuring. It's about restructuring the power dynamics in this family." Richard approached us next, his expression thoughtful. "That was unexpected, Rachel, but perhaps exactly what was needed." He hesitated, then added, "I should have intervened sooner, before things reached this point." "Why didn't you?" I asked, genuinely curious. He sighed heavily. 40. Years of marriage creates patterns that are difficult to break, and Eleanor has always been formidable when challenged. Daniel snorted. "That's putting it mildly." "Nevertheless," Richard continued, "I owe you both an apology, and my gratitude for this proposal. It's more generous than we deserve." "It's not charity," I reminded him. "It's a structured investment with terms that protect everyone's interests." Richard smiled slightly. "Yes, I noticed that. Quite thorough terms, in fact. You've been underestimated in this family for too long." As Richard moved away, my phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. "How did it go?" I typed a quick reply. "Plan presented. Eleanor cornered but not yet surrendered. Stay tuned." Almost immediately, she responded, "Brace yourself. He made inquiries about our relationship this morning. Professional and personal. My office received calls." My stomach tightened. "Looking for ammunition," I murmured to Daniel, showing him the message. "She won't find any," he said confidently. "Unless there's something about you and Olivia I don't know." The attempt at humor fell flat given the circumstances. "Nothing improper," I assured him. "But Eleanor excels at spinning innocent relationships into suspicious narratives." "Let her try," Daniel said firmly. "We know the truth." As we headed upstairs to our room, I felt a curious mixture of tension and relief. The confrontation I'd been dreading for years had finally happened, and while nothing was resolved yet, the cards were on the table. My financial independence was revealed. Eleanor's manipulations were exposed. The power dynamics had irrevocably shifted. But Eleanor Wilson was nothing if not resilient. And wounded predators are often the most dangerous. "She'll counterattack," I said as we reached our room. "She's processing now, but by dinner she'll have a new strategy." Daniel nodded grimly. "I know. The question is, what form will it take?" We didn't have to wait long to find out. As we were preparing for dinner, a sharp knock came at our door. Daniel opened it to find Sophia, her face pale with anger. "You need to see this," she said, thrusting her tablet toward us. "Mother just sent it to everyone, including James Parker." On the screen was an email from Eleanor with a PDF attachment titled Chen Thompson Investment Analysis. The document itself was a carefully crafted insinuation. Emails between Olivia and me, from years ago, taken out of context and annotated to suggest insider trading and financial impropriety in my early investments. "She's attacking your money," Daniel said grimly, scanning the document. "Trying to undermine your credibility by questioning how you built your wealth." "These are completely out of context," I said, recognizing fragments of legitimate conversations, twisted to appear suspicious. "How did she even get these emails?" "James Parker has connections at several financial institutions," Sophia explained. "Mother must have had him pull strings immediately after last night." I scrolled through the document, anger building. This is a desperate attempt to discredit me. None of this would stand up to actual scrutiny. Scrutiny isn't the point, Daniel pointed out. Creating doubt is. If she can make your wealth appear questionable, she undermines your proposal. My phone rang, Olivia calling. I answered immediately. I just received the most fascinating document from Eleanor Wilson, Olivia said without preamble, her tone deceptively calm. Apparently, we've been engaged in financial misconduct for the past decade. How interesting. I'm so sorry, I began, but she cut me off. Don't be. I've been dealing with desperate people like Eleanor my entire career. A pause. Though I must say, she's more thorough than most. She even found our emails about the Hamilton Tech opportunity. The Hamilton Tech investment had been completely legitimate, but had come to my attention through Olivia's industry connections. Exactly the kind of mentorship relationship that could be twisted to appear improper. What should we do? I asked. Exactly what Eleanor isn't expecting, Olivia replied confidently. I'm forwarding you documentation of every transaction mentioned in her little hit piece, complete with regulatory filings, timing verifications, and public announcements that preceded our discussions. You kept all that? Rachel, Olivia's voice held a touch of amusement. I've been a woman in finance for 30 years. I document everything precisely because of people like Eleanor Wilson. Relief flooded through me. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Olivia cautioned. Eleanor's moved this from financial maneuvering to personal attack. The question is, how will you respond? I thought for a moment, looking at Daniel and Sophia, both watching me with concern. Directly, I decided. No deflection, no defensiveness. Just facts and a clear boundary. Good girl, Olivia approved. Call me after. As I hung up, Daniel squeezed my shoulder supportively. What's the plan? I straightened my spine, resolution hardening. First, we document everything to refute these insinuations. Then, we make it clear that personal attacks change the terms of my offer. How so? Sophia asked. Eleanor needs to understand that my willingness to help comes with conditions, not just financial ones, but behavioral ones too. I looked at Daniel. I won't invest in a family system that continues to operate on manipulation and character assassination. He nodded in agreement. So we respond to her email? No, I said, a strategy forming. We address it at dinner, publicly, where she'll have to face the consequences of her tactics directly. Sophia's eyes widened. That's bold. It's necessary, I corrected. 5 years of trying to placate Eleanor has only emboldened her. It's time for a different approach. As we prepared to head downstairs, my phone buzzed with an incoming email, Olivia's documentation. I forwarded it to my tablet, armed now with verification for every transaction Eleanor had attempted to smear. Tonight would be a turning point, one way or another. Either Eleanor would accept the new reality and the terms that came with my financial assistance, or she would continue her scorched earth approach and face the consequences. Either way, I was done being underestimated, done being manipulated, done pretending to be less than I was to protect Eleanor Wilson's fragile ego. It was time to show her exactly who she was dealing with. The Wilson family dining room had witnessed countless power plays over the years. Business negotiations disguised as casual conversation, strategic matrimonial arrangements presented as loving suggestions, and family alliances forming and dissolving over perfectly plated meals. Tonight would be no different, except perhaps in the magnitude of what was at stake. Daniel, Sophia, and I entered together, a united front that didn't go unnoticed by Eleanor, who was already seated at the head of the table. She wore a midnight blue dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Her jewelry, carefully selected to project wealth and confidence, a facade I now knew to be as hollow as her financial empire. Richard was conspicuously absent, as was James Parker. Interesting. Eleanor preferred to fight without witnesses who might contradict her narrative. "Where's Father?" Sophia asked as we took our seats. "Taking a call from the bank," Eleanor replied smoothly. "He'll join us shortly." She gestured to the housekeeper, who immediately began serving the first course. I thought we might enjoy a quiet family dinner before resuming our discussions. The false pleasantness in her tone set my teeth on edge, but I forced a neutral expression. On my tablet, discreetly set beside my plate, Olivia's documentation was ready for reference. "Lovely idea," I replied, matching her tone. Though I was surprised to receive your email just before dinner, the one questioning the legitimacy of my investments. Eleanor's smile didn't waver. "Simply due diligence, dear. In light of your rather extraordinary claims, verification seems prudent." Daniel set down his fork with deliberate precision. "Verification is one thing, Mother. Character assassination is another." "Dramatic as always, Daniel," she sighed, taking a sip of wine. "I merely raised questions about timing and information sources. If Rachel's financial success is as legitimate as she claims, surely she welcomes the opportunity to clarify." "I'm happy to clarify anything," I said calmly. "Though I'm curious, how did you obtain private emails between Olivia and me from nearly a decade ago?" Eleanor waved dismissively. "James has connections. In troubling financial times, it's important to know exactly who we're dealing with." "So you authorized James to potentially violate privacy laws to obtain my correspondence," I noted. "Interesting approach to due diligence." Eleanor's eyes narrowed slightly, but before she could respond, Richard entered the dining room, his expression grim. "Sorry for the delay," he said, taking his seat opposite Eleanor. "The bank was insistent about discussing certain matters. Nothing that can't wait until after dinner," Eleanor cut in quickly. Richard's gaze met mine briefly, communicating something urgent. "Actually, I think we should address this now. The quarterly reports are being processed earlier than expected. The bank has concerns about certain discrepancies." Eleanor's knuckles whitened around her wineglass. "Richard, please, not during dinner." "When, Eleanor?" he challenged quietly. "After the reports become public? After the bank freezes our accounts? When exactly is the right time to address the hole you've dug for this family?" The tension in the room thickened. Sophia shifted uncomfortably while Daniel watched his parents with undisguised concern. "Perhaps," I suggested, "this is the perfect time to discuss everything openly, including the questions Eleanor has raised about my financial background." Eleanor's gaze snapped to me, calculation replacing momentary unease. "Yes, let's do that. Starting with how a young woman with no family connections or notable resources managed to make such fortuitous early investments." I set down my napkin and reached for my tablet. "I'd be happy to walk through my investment history. Let's begin with Hamilton Tech, since your email seemed particularly focused on that transaction." I pulled up the documentation Olivia had sent, turning the screen toward the table. "Here's the complete timeline of my investment. Public announcement of their Series A funding round on March 12th. My purchase of shares through a publicly available venture fund on March 15th. And subsequent direct investment during their Series B round 6 months later." "Convenient documentation," Eleanor remarked. "Standard practice," I corrected. "Especially for someone mentored by Olivia Chen, who taught me from day one that complete records are non-negotiable." Richard leaned forward with interest. "May I?" He gestured to the tablet. I passed it to him, watching as he scrolled through the documentation with practiced precision, the eye of someone who understood what he was examining. "These all appear to be in order," he commented. "Proper timing, appropriate disclosures, standard investment vehicles." Eleanor's expression tightened. "Richard." "No, Eleanor," he cut her off firmly. "I've spent 40 years in finance. I know legitimate documentation when I see it." He looked up at me with what appeared to be genuine respect. This is meticulous record keeping. Thank you, I said simply. Records can be falsified, Eleanor insisted, though her tone lacked conviction. By whom? Daniel challenged. Olivia Chen, whose reputation in financial circles is impeccable? The venture funds that processed these transactions? The SEC filings that recorded them? Eleanor's strategy was unraveling visibly. She had expected me to be defensive, perhaps emotional, an easy target for further manipulation. Instead, she found herself confronted with documentation she couldn't easily dismiss, and family members no longer willing to accept her version of reality. The point remains, she said, switching tactics, that regardless of how Rachel acquired her supposed fortune, we're being asked to place the Wilson family finances in the hands of an outsider. I'm not an outsider, I stated firmly. I'm Daniels, wife of 5 years, and I'm offering assistance, not a takeover. With significant conditions attached, Eleanor pointed out. Yes, I acknowledged, including transparency and accountability, principles that might have prevented this crisis in the first place. Richard set down the tablet, his decision visibly made. Eleanor, I've reviewed Rachel's proposal in detail this afternoon. It's sound. More than sound. It's generous, given the circumstances. You can't seriously be considering this, Eleanor said, her voice rising slightly. I'm not just considering it, Richard replied. I'm endorsing it. As the legal head of Wilson Investments, I'm prepared to move forward with Rachel's restructuring plan effective immediately. Eleanor's face flushed with anger. You don't have the authority to make that decision unilaterally. Actually, I do, Richard countered calmly. While you've been handling the day-to-day investment decisions, disastrously I might add, the corporate governance structure still requires my signature for any fundamental changes. A fact you've worked around through various means that we won't discuss at the dinner table. The implication of fraud hung in the air between them. So, that's it? Eleanor demanded, looking around the table. A family dynasty spanning generations, handed over to a marketing consultant who married in 5 years ago? Not handed over, I corrected firmly. Stabilized through a structured investment that benefits everyone while preventing financial collapse. And what about my concerns? Eleanor pressed. My position? My role? You'll retain your social standing, I assured her, understanding her priorities. Board positions, club memberships, the public-facing elements you value. What you won't retain is unilateral control of investment decisions or family finances. Eleanor stared at me, something shifting in her expression. Not acceptance exactly, but perhaps the beginning of recognition that her options were limited. And if I refuse these terms? She asked quietly. Richard answered. Then we proceed without your cooperation, Eleanor. The bank's concerns are immediate. The quarterly reports can't be massaged anymore. We either implement Rachel's plan with your support, or we do it despite your objections. Eleanor's gaze moved from face to face around the table, finding no allies. Daniel watched her with a mixture of sadness and resolution. Sophia's expression held both disappointment and determination. Richard looked simply tired, a man who had finally reached his limit after decades of compromise. A heavy silence fell over the dining room, broken only by the distant sound of waves crashing against the Cape Cod shore. Outside the windows, darkness had fallen completely, the vast Atlantic invisible but for the occasional whitecap catching moonlight. I need assurances, Eleanor finally said, her voice carefully controlled. Written guarantees about my position, my allowance, my standing in the family. Reasonable, I acknowledged. We can add those to the formal agreement, with appropriate parameters. Another silence as Eleanor weighed her limited options. Then, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. Draft the documents, she said to Richard. I'll review them before signing anything. It wasn't surrender. Eleanor Wilson would never surrender. But it was acquiescence, however reluctant. The immediate battle at least was over. Richard nodded, relief evident in his posture. I'll have James prepare everything first thing tomorrow. Speaking of James, Daniel interjected, we should discuss his role going forward, given his willingness to obtain private communications through questionable means. Eleanor's eyes flashed. James has served this family for 20 years. And appears to have crossed ethical lines at your direction, Daniel finished. That needs to be addressed. I agree, Richard said firmly. His actions reflect on the entire family. Eleanor opened her mouth to object, then closed it again, apparently recognizing that this wasn't a fight she could win tonight. Instead, she reached for her wine glass, taking a deliberate sip before changing the subject. Well, she said with forced lightness, since it appears Rachel will now be intimately involved in family finances, perhaps we should discuss the upcoming charity gala. The guest list requires attention, and as a major donor, the Wilson family presence must be carefully considered. The abrupt pivot to social matters, as if we hadn't just negotiated a fundamental restructuring of family power dynamics, was so typically Eleanor that I almost laughed. This was her way of reasserting control over the domain she still commanded: social position and public appearance. I'd be happy to discuss the gala, I replied evenly, allowing her this small victory. Though perhaps we should finish dinner first. Eleanor signaled to the housekeeper, who had been discreetly hovering near the door, uncertain whether to proceed with the next course given the tense conversation. The woman immediately moved to serve, grateful for the clear direction. As the meal resumed, a strange sort of peace descended, not comfortable exactly, but at least functional. Richard engaged Sophia in conversation about her university research, while Daniel discussed an upcoming architectural project with surprising normalcy. Eleanor maintained a rigid dignity, contributing occasional comments while clearly processing the seismic shift in her position. I observed it all with a sense of unreality. 5 years of navigating Eleanor's subtle hostility, of being the outsider, of carefully managing my words and actions to avoid giving her ammunition. And now, in the space of 24 hours, everything had changed. Not because I'd finally fought back, but because circumstances had forced the truth into the open. As dessert was served, Eleanor's favorite lemon tart, a detail that suddenly struck me as poignant, Daniel's hand found mine beneath the table, squeezing gently. When I met his gaze, I saw pride there, and something else. Liberation. Whatever happened with the family finances, he had broken free of patterns established since childhood. That alone made tonight's confrontation worthwhile. After dinner, Richard invited everyone to the study to discuss next steps, but Eleanor declined, citing a migraine. As she rose from the table, she paused beside my chair, her voice low enough that only I could hear. You may have won this round, Rachel, but remember, I've been playing this game since before you were born. I met her gaze steadily. This isn't a game, Eleanor. It's your family's future, and I'm not trying to win. I'm trying to help. Something flickered in her eyes, surprise perhaps at an answer that wasn't combative. Then her mask of cold dignity returned, and she departed without another word. In the study, Richard wasted no time outlining the immediate actions needed. The bank requires assurances by noon tomorrow. I've already alerted our accountants to prepare the necessary documentation for Rachel's capital infusion. What about Mother? Sophia asked. Do you think she'll actually cooperate? Richard sighed heavily. Eleanor is many things, but she's not foolish. She recognizes when a position is untenable. She'll negotiate hard for her personal interests, but she won't sabotage the overall restructuring. I wouldn't be so sure, Daniel cautioned. I've never seen her backed into a corner like this before. Which is why we need to move quickly, I noted. I can initiate the first transfer tomorrow to address the most pressing obligations. The formal investment agreement can follow once the immediate crisis is averted. Richard nodded gratefully. That would be immensely helpful. The mortgage payment on this property is the most urgent concern. If we miss it, it becomes public record almost immediately. Consider it handled, I assured him. I still can't believe you've had this financial capacity all along, Sophia marveled. All these years, watching Mother treat you like some fortune hunter. It was easier to let her believe what she wanted to believe, I said simply. But why? Richard asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. Most people in your position would have flaunted their success, especially faced with Eleanor's challenging demeanor. I considered this, formulating an answer that felt truthful. Because I didn't want money to be what defined me in this family, either the lack of it or the possession of it. I wanted to be accepted or rejected for who I am, not what I'm worth. A noble sentiment, Richard observed, though perhaps optimistic given the Wilson family dynamics. I'm learning that, I acknowledged with a small smile. Daniel wrapped an arm around my shoulders. Well, I for one am glad the truth is finally out about both Mother's financial mismanagement and your success. No more secrets, no more pretending. Speaking of no more secrets, Sophia interjected, what about James Parker? He accessed Rachel's private communications illegally. Shouldn't there be consequences? Richard's expression hardened. There. Will be. I'll be having a very direct conversation with James tomorrow about ethical boundaries and client confidentiality. That may not be sufficient, I noted carefully. If he obtained those emails through improper channels, that's potentially a legal issue, not just an ethical one. What are you suggesting? Richard asked. That we consult with another attorney, one who represents our interests, not Eleanor's, about the appropriate response. Daniel nodded in agreement. Mother has enabled James to cross lines for years. This needs to be addressed formally. Richard considered this, then nodded. I'll make some calls in the morning. In the meantime, we should finalize the details of the restructuring plan. Rachel, can you walk us through the implementation timeline? For the next hour, we discussed practical matters, which obligations would be addressed first, how the capital infusion would be structured, what governance changes would be implemented to prevent future problems. Throughout the conversation, I was struck by how readily Richard accepted my expertise, how attentively Sophia considered my recommendations, how proudly Daniel watched as I outlined complex financial strategies. This was what acceptance felt like. Not grudging tolerance or polite distance, but genuine respect and inclusion. The irony wasn't lost on me, that Eleanor's financial disaster had accomplished what 5 years of patient effort could not. Full integration into the Wilson family. As we concluded our planning session, Richard stood and extended his hand to me formally. Thank you, Rachel. Not just for the financial assistance, but for approaching this with integrity and family welfare in mind. The Wilsons owe you a debt that goes beyond dollars. I shook his hand, touched by the sincerity in his voice. You're welcome, Richard, though I should note, I'm a Wilson too. He smiled, a genuine warmth replacing his usual reserved demeanor. Indeed you are. Something I think we've all failed to fully appreciate until now. After Richard and Sophia had departed, Daniel poured himself a small scotch from his father's collection and leaned against the desk, studying me with a mixture of admiration and residual disbelief. That was impressive, he said finally. The way you handled everything, Mother's accusations, Father's concerns, the practical details. You were completely in your element. I moved to stand beside him, suddenly exhausted now that the adrenaline was fading. I've spent years hiding part of who I am from your family. It's actually a relief to finally bring my whole self to the table. Even if that self is being deployed to save the Wilsons from financial ruin? He asked with a wry smile. Even then, I agreed, returning his smile. Though I have to admit, it wasn't exactly how I planned to reveal my secret millions. I imagine not, Daniel chuckled, then grew serious. Are you sure about this, Rachel? Using your personal capital to address my family's mistakes? It's not your responsibility. I'm sure, I said firmly. Not just for your parents or for appearances, but for us, for our future. And frankly, it's a sound investment. The Wilson name and remaining assets do have substantial value with proper management. Daniel shook his head in amazement. My practical, strategic wife. Who would have thought you'd end up being the financial savior of the Wilson dynasty? Certainly not your mother, I observed dryly. Certainly not me, he countered, pulling me into an embrace. Though I should have recognized your capabilities long ago. I'm sorry I never pushed harder against Mother's treatment of you. I rested my head against his shoulder, the day's tensions finally catching up with me. You're pushing now. That's what matters. As we left the study, arm in arm, I glanced toward the staircase leading to the second floor where Eleanor had retreated hours earlier. A light still shone beneath her door. She was awake, perhaps planning her next move, perhaps simply processing the dramatic reversal of fortune. Either way, tomorrow would bring a new chapter in the Wilson family story. One where Eleanor no longer held unilateral power, where transparency replaced manipulation, and where I finally took my rightful place, not as the tolerated outsider, but as a full and respected member of the family I had married into. The morning arrived with unexpected tranquility, sunlight streaming through the windows, the distant sound of waves creating a peaceful backdrop to what promised to be a consequential day. Daniel and I had slept surprisingly well, the weight of secrets finally lifted, allowing a relaxation neither of us had fully experienced in years. As we dressed, my phone buzzed with a message from Olivia. Spoke with my attorneys. Parker's method of obtaining emails definitely crossed legal lines, evidence available if needed. I showed the message to Daniel, who frowned. Another conversation we need to have today. One thing at a time, I advised. Financial stabilization first, then addressing James's actions. Downstairs, we found Richard already in the dining room, reviewing documents while picking at his breakfast. He looked up as we entered, his expression more energized than I'd seen since our arrival. Good morning, he greeted us. I've been up since dawn. The accountants have prepared everything for the initial transfer. Once that's complete, we can begin the formal restructuring process. Where's Sophia? Daniel asked, pouring coffee for both of us. Already gone. She had an early faculty meeting back in Boston. Richard slid several documents across the table. She reviewed these before leaving and is fully supportive. I scanned the papers, standard transfer authorizations, formally structured as a secured investment rather than a gift. Everything appeared in order. And Eleanor? I asked cautiously. Richard's expression tightened slightly. She's coming around. We had a lengthy conversation after everyone retired last night. She understands the realities, even if she doesn't like them. As if summoned by her name, Eleanor appeared in the doorway, impeccably dressed as always, though I noted subtle signs of strain, a tightness around her eyes, a certain rigidity in her posture. Good morning, she said formally, moving to the sideboard to pour herself coffee. I understand there are documents requiring my signature. Yes, Richard confirmed. Authorization for Rachel's initial capital infusion and the preliminary restructuring framework. Eleanor took a seat at the table, accepting the papers Richard slid toward her. She reviewed them with practiced efficiency, her expression revealing nothing. The terms are generous, she noted without looking up. The interest rate on the investment particularly so. I'm not looking to profit from family difficulties, I explained simply. No, Eleanor agreed, finally meeting my gaze. You're looking for something else entirely. Eleanor, Richard began warningly. Respect, I interrupted, holding Eleanor's gaze steadily. Recognition that I'm not just Daniel's wife or an interloper in the Wilson family, but a person with value and contribution of my own. A tense silence followed my directness. Then, unexpectedly, Eleanor nodded. Fair enough, she said quietly, though you might have demonstrated these capabilities sooner. Would you have been receptive? I countered. The ghost of a smile touched her lips. Probably not. She turned her attention back to the documents, signing each with her characteristic flourish before sliding them back to Richard. There, she said briskly. The Wilson financial future is now officially in my daughter-in-law's hands. I trust you'll manage it more effectively than I have. The simple acknowledgement of failure, however obliquely stated, from Eleanor Wilson was perhaps the most shocking development yet. It will be managed collaboratively, I clarified, with professional advisors and proper oversight. Of course, Eleanor agreed, her tone suggesting that details were beneath her concern now. Richard tells me you've agreed to certain provisions regarding my social position and personal allowance. Yes, I confirmed. Those will be formalized in the comprehensive agreement, but you have my word that your public standing will be protected. Eleanor studied me for a moment, as if seeing me clearly for the first time. You understand what matters to me. Interesting. I've been paying attention for 5 years, I replied simply. Another almost smile flickered across her face. Indeed. She rose from the table with characteristic grace. If you'll excuse me, I have calls to make. Certain social obligations require rearrangement in light of our evolving circumstances. As she departed, Daniel released a breath I hadn't realized he was holding. That was almost civilized. Your mother is nothing if not adaptable, Richard observed. She recognizes when a battle is lost and immediately begins positioning for the next engagement. You think this is temporary? I asked. Her acceptance of the new arrangement? Richard considered this. Eleanor will never be content without control, but she's practical enough to work within new constraints when necessary. He gathered the signed documents. I'll fax these to the accountants immediately. They're prepared to process everything this morning. As Richard left to handle the paperwork, Daniel turned to me with wonder in his eyes. It's really happening. The great Eleanor Wilson has acquiesced. For now, I cautioned. Your father's right. This isn't permanent surrender, just strategic retreat. Still, Daniel mused, I never thought I'd see the day when Mother signed away financial control of anything, let alone to you. Desperation creates flexibility, I noted pragmatically. My phone buzzed with an incoming call. Mark. I excused myself to the terrace to answer. Hey, how are things going with the in-laws from hell? My brother asked without preamble. Actually, better than expected, I replied, finding myself smiling. The post-nup is officially dead, and I'm now formally investing in the family's financial restructuring. A low whistle came through the phone. So they know everything about your investments? Everything, I confirmed. It's been illuminating. I bet, Mark chuckled. How's the dragon lady taking it? With surprising dignity, all things considered. Though that may be because she has no viable alternative. And Daniel, how's he handling discovering his wife is secretly loaded? Supportively, I said, glancing through the window to where Daniel was visible, helping himself to breakfast. It's actually brought us closer. No more secrets, no more pretending to be less than I am. Good, Mark said firmly. You've spent too many years dimming your light for those people. It's about time they saw you clearly. As we finished our conversation, I felt a presence behind me and turned to find Eleanor standing there, elegant against the backdrop of manicured gardens. Your brother? She asked, nodding toward the phone. Yes, I confirmed, surprised she recognized Mark's role from the one-sided conversation. I've always wondered about him, Eleanor commented. The only blood family you have left, yet he's never accompanied you to Wilson events. He's been invited, I pointed out. He chooses not to attend. Because he dislikes us, Eleanor surmised accurately. Or perhaps just me. I didn't deny it. Mark is protective. He saw how I was treated, especially in the early years. Eleanor moved to the terrace railing, looking out over the property that had been in Wilson hands for generations, and now was mortgaged to the hilt thanks to her financial miscalculations. You know, she said conversationally, when Daniel first brought you home, I was certain you were after the Wilson fortune. The marketing consultant from modest means, suddenly captivated by my son? It seemed obvious. I know what you thought, I replied evenly. And yet, she continued as if I hadn't spoken, you were the one with the fortune all along, building it quietly while I was mismanaging ours. She turned to face me directly. That's rather ironic, don't you think? Life often is, I agreed cautiously, uncertain where this conversation was heading. Eleanor studied me with new eyes, calculating still, but without the dismissive edge I'd grown accustomed to. You're not what I expected, Rachel. I'm still deciding whether that's good or bad for this family. I'm part of this family, I reminded her. Its welfare is my concern too. Yes, she acknowledged with surprising sincerity. I'm beginning to see that. She straightened, her moment of reflection passing. The accountants will need detailed wire instructions for your transfer. I've asked James to contact you directly. About that, I said carefully. Given James's actions regarding my private communications, Daniel and I feel it would be best to work with different legal representation. Moving forward, Eleanor's expression hardened slightly. James has served the Wilson family for decades and may have broken federal privacy laws at your request, I countered firmly. That creates liability for everyone involved. You would pursue legal action against your husband's family? Of course not, I assured her. But we need counsel who operates within ethical boundaries, for everyone's protection. Eleanor considered this, weighing options with the strategic mind that had once made her formidable in Boston social circles. Finally, she nodded curtly. Fine. Richard can recommend alternatives, though I expect discretion regarding the circumstances of James's departure. Naturally, I agreed. Public embarrassment serves no one's interests. This pragmatic response seemed to satisfy Eleanor. With a final assessing look, she returned inside, leaving me alone on the terrace with the realization that some form of understanding had just been reached. Not friendship or even harmony, but a mutual recognition of new realities. When I rejoined, Daniel in the dining room, he looked up questioningly. Everything okay? I saw you talking with Mother. I think, I said slowly, we just established a truce of sorts. A genuine one? He asked skeptically. As genuine as anything gets with Eleanor, I replied with a small smile. Based on mutual self-interest and clear boundaries. Daniel shook his head in amazement. The world truly has turned upside down. My mother accepting financial rescue from my wife. My father asserting himself after decades of acquiescence. And you, finally acknowledged for who you really are. Not quite the anniversary weekend we planned, I observed wryly. No, he agreed, taking my hand. It's much more significant. It's the beginning of a new chapter for all of us. As Richard returned with confirmation that the transfer documents had been received and processed, I felt a sense of completion. Not of the Wilson family saga, which would continue to evolve in the coming months and years, but of my own journey from outsider to integral participant. The post-nuptial agreement that had arrived on our anniversary Eleanor's attempt to formalize my exclusion from the Wilson legacy had instead catalyzed my full integration into it. Not on her terms, but on mine. Not as the compliant daughter-in-law she'd hoped to shape, but as a financial partner with capabilities she'd never bothered to discover. It wasn't the resolution I'd imagined during 5 years of navigating Eleanor's subtle hostility, but it was perhaps the one I needed. A clean break from pretense, a full acknowledgement of my worth, and a new foundation for my marriage to Daniel. Eleanor Wilson had demanded I sign away my rights after 5 years of marriage. Instead, she'd discovered her daughter-in-law's hidden fortune, and with it, a new balance of power that would reshape the Wilson family forever. 6 months had transformed everything. The historic Wilson brownstone in Beacon Hill, which had witnessed 5 generations of family triumphs and tensions, now hummed with a different energy as I climbed the familiar steps for the quarterly family meeting. No longer the outsider bracing for Eleanor's subtle barbs, I entered as a key architect of the family's financial resurrection. Sophia greeted me in the foyer, her academic intensity softened by a new confidence. "The prodigal financial savior arrives," she teased, embracing me warmly. "Daniel's in the study with father. Mother is, well, being mother, fussing over the catering for after the meeting." "Some things never change," I observed with a smile. "And some things change dramatically," she countered, linking her arm through mine as we walked toward the study. "Have you seen the latest portfolio reports?" "I reviewed them this morning," I confirmed. "The stabilization is proceeding faster than projected." "Thanks to your strategic restructuring," Sophia noted. "Father can't stop talking about the Thompson approach to asset recovery. I think he's writing a paper on it." The study door stood open, revealing Richard and Daniel bent over financial projections spread across the antique desk. Both men looked up as we entered, their identical expressions of concentrated focus giving way to genuine welcome. "Rachel," Richard greeted me, extending his hand with the newfound respect that had characterized our interactions since Cape Cod. "Perfect timing. We were just discussing the Hayes property acquisition." "The commercial development in Cambridge?" I moved to the desk, scanning the prospectus. "The numbers look promising, though I'd want to review the environmental assessment more thoroughly." "Already requested," Daniel said, pressing a kiss to my temple. "Should arrive tomorrow." The easy collaboration, the automatic inclusion in major decisions. These were the most visible changes since my financial intervention. No longer was I the marketing consultant indulged with occasional attention. I had become an essential voice in Wilson family matters. "Shall we move to the dining room?" Richard suggested, gathering the documents. "Eleanor has been arranging things since dawn, and she'll be displeased if we delay." The formal dining room had been transformed into a boardroom of sorts, with portfolios at each place setting and a digital projector positioned at the head of the table. Eleanor stood surveying her preparations, every detail perfect as always. Her gaze met mine briefly as we entered, still assessing, still proud, but with a new dimension of guarded respect. "Rachel," she acknowledged with a nod. "I trust the drive from Cambridge wasn't too tedious." "Not at all," I replied, taking my seat across from Daniel. "The quarterly reports look quite positive." "Indeed." A flicker of something, perhaps reluctant appreciation, crossed Eleanor's features. "Your investment strategy has proven effective." From Eleanor, this constituted effusive praise. The restructuring that had begun with my emergency capital infusion had evolved into a comprehensive reimagining of Wilson investments. Gone were the high-risk ventures Eleanor had favored. In their place, a balanced portfolio that prioritized stability while still allowing for strategic growth. The family's financial standing, while not fully restored to its former glory, had stabilized and begun a steady recovery. Richard took his position at the head of the table, the role of family patriarch once again aligned with actual authority. "Shall we begin?" We have several significant matters to address today. For the next hour, we moved methodically through the quarterly business, investment performance, property management updates, charitable foundation activities, and upcoming opportunities. Each topic revealed the subtle but profound shift in family dynamics. Richard leading, Eleanor contributing but no longer dominating, Sophia and Daniel fully engaged, and me providing critical financial insights that were received with genuine consideration. This brings us to the final item on today's agenda, Richard announced, nodding to Daniel. The Cambridge Innovation Center proposal. Daniel activated the projector, displaying architectural renderings of a sleek modern building. As most of, Rachel and I have been developing this concept for the past 3 months, a combined architectural and marketing venture that would transform the former textile factory we acquired in the restructuring. The project was our brainchild, a collaborative space for emerging technology firms and creative startups designed to leverage both Daniel's architectural vision and my marketing expertise. More importantly, it represented our first true partnership venture, one that drew equally from both our professional strengths. The financial projections are in your packets, I continued, feeling a surge of pride as I outlined the business case. Initial tenant commitments already cover 60% of the space, with strong interest in the remainder. We're projecting profitability by the second year of operations. Eleanor studied the materials with characteristic thoroughness. The capital requirements are substantial, she noted, her tone carefully neutral. You're proposing to use Wilson family resources for this venture? Partially, Daniel clarified. We're suggesting a partnership structure. 40% Wilson investments, 40% from Rachel's personal portfolio, and 20% financed through traditional channels. A true merging of interests, Sophia observed with a knowing smile. Eleanor's gaze moved from the projections to me, measuring and evaluative. 6 months ago, such scrutiny would have made me tense. Today, I met it with calm confidence. The concept has merit, she finally conceded, though the financial commitment is significant given our still recovering position. That's why we've structured it as a partnership, I explained. It distributes both risk and potential returns appropriately while allowing the Wilson name to be associated with innovation rather than just traditional investments. Richard nodded approvingly. I've reviewed the proposal in detail and believe it represents exactly the kind of strategic direction we should be pursuing. Modern, forward-thinking, but built on sound financial principles. The unspoken comparison to Eleanor's failed investment approach hung briefly in the air before Richard continued. Unless there are objections, I propose we approve the Wilsons. Investment participation as outlined, subject to final review of financing terms. Eleanor's response would once have been the deciding factor, her disapproval sufficient to shelve any initiative regardless of its merits. Now she was simply one voice among equals, still respected, but no longer dominant. I have questions about the tenant vetting process, she said after a moment's consideration. The Wilson name carries certain expectations. We should ensure that all associated businesses meet appropriate standards. It was a reasonable point, not a rejection, another subtle indicator of how our relationship had evolved. We've developed comprehensive criteria, I assured her, sliding a document across the table. Brand alignment is a priority for both Daniel and me. Eleanor reviewed the materials with practiced efficiency. This addresses my concerns. I support moving forward. The approval, delivered without qualification or passive-aggressive commentary, represented perhaps the most profound change of all. Eleanor Wilson had accepted me not just as Daniel's wife or a financial savior, but as a legitimate business partner with expertise worth respecting. Excellent, Richard concluded. The Cambridge Innovation Center is approved pending final financial review. Now, unless there's other business, I believe Eleanor has arranged lunch on the terrace. As the meeting concluded and everyone gathered their materials, Daniel caught my hand beneath the table, giving it a gentle squeeze of congratulation. The Cambridge project meant as much to him as it did to me, a symbol of our professional partnership finally acknowledged and embraced by his family. On the terrace, elegant as always with its manicured container gardens and vintage wrought iron furniture, Eleanor had arranged a catered lunch that subtly communicated the family's recalibrated status. Still refined, still exclusive, but without the ostentatious excess that had characterized pre-crisis entertaining. As we helped ourselves to the buffet, Sophia joined me by the balustrade overlooking the Beacon Hill garden below. "Quite a triumph in there," she observed quietly. "The Cambridge project approval." "It's a sound business concept," I demurred. "The family's support makes sense financially." "Don't deflect," Sophia chided gently. 6 months ago, Mother would have dismissed anything you proposed simply because you proposed it. Today she offered constructive input and support. That's more than a business decision. It's a seismic shift in Wilson family dynamics. I smiled, acknowledging the truth in her assessment. Evolution was inevitable after Cape Cod, though I'll admit, I expected more resistance. From Mother? Sophia glanced to where Eleanor was directing the caterer with characteristic precision. "Don't underestimate her adaptability, or her pragmatism. You saved the family fortune, and more importantly, the family reputation. That earns you significant capital in Eleanor Wilson's ledger. Capital that could be withdrawn if circumstances change," I noted realistically. "Perhaps," Sophia conceded. "But I don't think so. What's changed isn't just financial, it's fundamental. You've earned her respect, Rachel. That's considerably harder to lose than her approval." This insightful distinction captured something essential about my evolving relationship with Eleanor. The respect between us now, while still complicated by past history and fundamental differences in outlook, was built on demonstrated capability rather than conditional acceptance. As lunch progressed, I found myself in conversation with Richard about the broader economic outlook, a discussion that would have been unthinkable in the pre-crisis era, when Eleanor would have dominated any financial topic and minimized my contributions. "Your perspective on technology sector valuation has proven remarkably accurate," Richard noted. "The adjustments you suggested to our portfolio positioning have outperformed market benchmarks significantly." "I've been tracking the pattern for years," I explained. "It's one of the advantages of starting my investment activities in technology. Rather than traditional sectors, you develop an eye for sustainable innovation versus temporary market enthusiasm." "A perspective we sorely needed," Richard acknowledged. "If we had integrated your insights earlier." He trailed off, both of us aware that the hypothetical rewrite of family financial history served little purpose now. "We're looking forward, not backward," I reminded him gently. "The restructuring is working. The family assets are recovering. That's what matters." Richard smiled, the genuine warmth that had increasingly characterized his interactions with me since Cape Cod evident in his expression. "Indeed, though I must admit, I occasionally wonder what might have happened if Eleanor had never sent that post-nuptial agreement." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. The document intended to formalize my exclusion from the Wilson family. Finances had instead catalyzed my integration into them, and on terms far more favorable than Eleanor could ever have anticipated. "Some catalysts come disguised as threats," I observed. "Philosopher as well as financier," Richard noted with approval. "The Wilson family has acquired a Renaissance woman." As lunch concluded, Eleanor approached, her social mask firmly in place, for what would once have been a performative interaction designed to remind me of my outsider status. Now, however, there was a different quality to her carefully composed demeanor, less defensive, more collegial. "The Cambridge project presentation was quite thorough," she acknowledged. "Daniel mentioned you took the lead on the financial modeling." "We divided responsibilities according to our strengths," I replied. Daniel handled the architectural vision and space planning. I focused on the business case and tenant acquisition strategy. Eleanor nodded, her assessment continuing. It's a different approach than traditional Wilson investments. More modern, more integrated with current business trends. Coming from Eleanor, this observation, delivered without explicit criticism, constituted high praise. I accepted it as such. The market is evolving, I noted, particularly in the innovation sector. The Wilson name carries significant weight, but it needs to be associated with forward-thinking ventures to maintain relevance with emerging business leaders. Yes, Eleanor agreed after a thoughtful pause. That's become apparent during the restructuring. Richard has mentioned your insights have been valuable in this regard. 6 months ago, such an admission would have been unthinkable. Today, it represented a carefully calculated acknowledgement of changed realities. Eleanor's recognition that her daughter-in-law had earned a legitimate place at the family table. I appreciate that, Eleanor, I said simply, neither gloating over the concession nor minimizing its significance. Something like respect flickered in her eyes. Not warmth exactly, perhaps never that, but a genuine recognition of capability that meant more than any superficial affection could have. Our conversation was interrupted by Daniel's approach, his expression suggesting he had news to share. The call with the Cambridge Planning Commission just concluded. He informed us. Final approvals have been granted for the Innovation Center. We can begin the tenant build-out next month. Excellent, Eleanor said briskly. The sooner the project begins generating returns, the better for overall portfolio balance. Her immediate focus on financial performance rather than congratulations was so characteristically Eleanor that I nearly smiled. Some aspects of personality remained constant, even as the underlying dynamics evolved. We should celebrate, Daniel suggested, his hand finding mine naturally. Dinner tonight? Sophia and Father could join us. A family dinner would be appropriate, Eleanor agreed, her gaze including me in the family designation without hesitation. Another small but significant indicator of change. As the gathering concluded and we prepared to depart, Richard drew me aside for a private word. Before you go, I wanted to share something with you. He withdrew an envelope from his jacket. This arrived yesterday from the bank. Inside was a formal letter confirming the final satisfaction of the mortgage on the Cape Cod property, the last major financial obligation from the pre-crisis era to be resolved. The Wilson summer home is fully ours again, Richard said quietly. No encumbrances, no lingering liabilities. A significant milestone in the recovery you engineered. That we engineered, I corrected gently. It's been a family effort. Richard smiled, genuine emotion breaking through his usually reserved demeanor. Yes, it has. Though none of it would have been possible without your intervention. I want you to know that I recognize that. We all do, including Eleanor in her own way. His acknowledgement touched me deeply. Thank you, Richard. That means a great deal. As Daniel and I drove back to our Cambridge condo, the afternoon sun bathing Boston in golden light, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with financial statements or investment returns. The journey that had begun 6 months ago, with Eleanor's imperious demand that I sign away my rights, had transformed not just the Wilson family finances, but the very nature of my place within the family. You're quiet, Daniel observed, glancing away from the road briefly. Everything okay? Just reflecting, I replied. Your father showed me the letter from the bank. The Cape House is clear. Daniel smiled. Another milestone. We should plan. A weekend there soon, just the two of us. Celebrate properly. I'd like that, I agreed, thinking of how differently I would experience that house now. No longer as the tolerated outsider, but as an integral part of the family whose name graced its deed. You know, Daniel continued thoughtfully, when Mother sent that post-nuptial agreement 6 months ago. I was furious. I saw it as the ultimate expression of her refusal to accept you fully into the family. And now? I prompted. Now I almost want to thank her, he admitted with a wry smile. If she hadn't made that move, you might never have revealed your financial capabilities. We might still be living in that strange half-truth where you hid part of yourself, and she underestimated you at every turn. I considered this perspective. True, though I'm not sure I would have chosen such a dramatic revelation. Maybe that's exactly what was needed, Daniel suggested. A clean break from all the pretense and positioning, a reset of the entire dynamic. As we arrived home, I found myself continuing to reflect on Daniel's observation. The post-nuptial agreement, intended as a mechanism of exclusion, had instead become a catalyst for my full integration into the Wilson family, not as the compliant, daughter-in-law Eleanor had attempted to shape, but as a financial partner with capabilities she had never bothered to discover. Inside our condo, a package waited on the entry table. The advance copies of Boston Business Monthly, featuring the Cambridge Innovation Center as its cover story. The headline read, "Wilson-Thompson Partnership Reimagines Innovation Space. How a New Generation is Transforming a Boston Dynasty." The hyphenated Wilson-Thompson captured perfectly the new reality. Not Wilson alone, but a true partnership that honored both legacies. Daniel picked up the magazine, studying the cover with evident pride. "They got it right," he observed. "Equal billing, as it should be." I leaned against his shoulder, examining the photograph of us standing before the architectural model of our joint vision. "Your mother will have opinions about the headline." "Undoubtedly," Daniel chuckled, "though even she can't argue with the results. The waiting list for tenant space is growing weekly." My phone buzzed with an incoming message from Eleanor, her timing impeccable as always. Richard shared the bank letter. Cape House dinner next weekend to mark the occasion. Family only. The invitation itself was unremarkable. The final 2 words, however, carried profound significance. Family only. And I was unquestionably included in that designation, not as an adjunct or a tolerated addition, but as an essential member. I showed the message to Daniel, who raised an eyebrow in appreciation of its subtle meaning. "Progress," he noted. "Real progress." "Indeed," I agreed, thinking of how far we had come since that certified letter had arrived on our anniversary. Later that evening, as Daniel prepared dinner, I found myself drawn to my home office where the financial documentation of the Wilson restructuring filled a dedicated filing cabinet. On impulse, I opened the bottom drawer where I had preserved the original post-nuptial agreement, unsigned, now nothing more than a historical artifact of a relationship dynamic that no longer existed. The document's terms seemed almost laughable now, its assumption that I needed to be legally separated from Wilson assets, its careful provisions to ensure I received only a reasonable stipend in the event of divorce. The profound irony that those very Wilson assets had required my financial intervention to survive was not lost on me. I closed the drawer, returning to the kitchen where Daniel was putting the finishing touches on our meal. The simple domesticity of the moment, preparing dinner together in the home we shared, stood in sharp contrast to the complex financial machinations and family power dynamics that had occupied so much of the past 6 months. "I was thinking," Daniel said as he plated our dinner, "about something Father said today, that the crisis forced the family to reevaluate priorities in healthy ways." "Do you think that's true?" I asked, genuinely curious about his perspective. Daniel considered the question thoughtfully. "I think it's forced a kind of honesty we've never had before. About money, about control, about who contributes what to the family legacy." "Including your mother?" I pressed gently. "Especially Mother," he acknowledged. "She built her entire identity around being the guardian of the Wilson fortune and social standing, Watching that crumble was devastating for her, but she's resilient, adapting to the new reality where her voice is important, but not absolute. And us? I asked. How has it changed us? Daniel reached across the table, taking my hand. It's removed the last barriers between us. No more secrets, no more careful navigation around family sensitivities. Just us, building something together on equal footing. His assessment resonated deeply. The financial revelation had indeed transformed our marriage, not by introducing wealth as a factor. It had always been there, hidden beneath the surface, but by eliminating the need for pretense and accommodation. 2 new beginnings, Daniel proposed, raising his wine glass in toast. And unexpected journeys, I added, clinking my glass against his. As we enjoyed our dinner, conversation turning to plans for the Innovation Center and the upcoming Cape weekend, I reflected on the strange circular journey of the past 6 months. Eleanor's demand that I sign a post-nuptial agreement after 5 years of marriage had been intended to formalize my exclusion from the Wilson family finances. Instead, it had catalyzed my full integration into them, not as the subordinate she had envisioned, but as a financial partner whose resources and expertise had proven essential to the family's survival. The document meant to diminish me had instead revealed my true capabilities. The woman who had underestimated me for years had been forced to recognize my value. The secrets I had kept to protect my marriage had become the foundation for its strengthening. Eleanor Wilson had demanded I sign away my rights after 5 years of marriage, never suspecting she was addressing a woman whose personal fortune exceeded her family's diminished resources. The irony was perfect, and perfectly satisfying. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new negotiations, new dynamics to navigate. Eleanor would never be easy to work with. The Wilson family complexities would never fully disappear. But the fundamental balance had shifted permanently. I had found my rightful place, not as the tolerated outsider, but as an essential part of the family's present and future. The post-nuptial agreement remained unsigned in my drawer, a reminder of where we had begun and how far we had come. A paper testament to failed manipulation and unexpected revelation. A catalyst that had transformed not just financial realities, but relational ones as well. In demanding that I sign away my rights, Eleanor had inadvertently secured my place at the Wilson family table, not on her terms, but on mine. Not as the compliant daughter-in-law she had tried to shape, but as the financially independent woman I had always been. Sometimes I reflected as Daniel and I cleared the dinner dishes together. Life's most perfect justice arrives in packages marked with entirely different intentions. Eleanor's post-nuptial demand, meant to formalize my exclusion, had instead revealed my hidden fortune, and with it, a new chapter for us all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.